Warriors, how are you, buddy? We got to get you back on the show soon, man. I hope you're doing well. Good to see you. Pam McSee, the lovely and talented Pam McSee has returned. The stunning and talented Kara McIver from Saskatchewan. It is flat over there, Kara. Make sure you wave so we can all see you in North America. Hexstar and Chad Smith. I'm Chad Smith. No, I'm Chad Smith. Sid Lord. There we go. Razor Revolution, nice to see you. Rich Hilke, good to have you here. Spookles the Cat. Oh, geez, Gary, that's one hell of a super chat. Thank you, buddy. I appreciate that. Way too kind. And we'll continue on here. And Walker Dale, nice to have you here from Australia. I appreciate that. And thank you for that amazing super chat as well. We are about, let's see here. 20 seconds to go. SJ, good to see you. Ross Smith, nice to have you here. Emilio, good to see you here. Spookles the Gorgeous Cat, the lovely Jenny, Chill Farm, the gorgeous Candy Romero from Vegas. Rock the Gas Bar is here, everyone. Lazarus, good to see you. And Adam Silberswag, welcome to Spaced Out Radio. Wham Bam, thank you, ma'am. Here we go, everyone. Let's rock and roll. From the mountains of central British Columbia to you listening around the world, this, my friends, is Spaced Out Radio. I am your host, Dave Scott, sitting in the captain's chair of SOR headquarters. We welcome you to tonight's show on our terrestrial affiliates around North America, digitally on TalkStream Live, Revolution Radio, and KPNL. All of our archives are free by going to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Just do old Davey the favor, hit that subscribe button. You can follow us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and on Instagram at Spaced Out Radio Show. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including rocking out to Bumblefoot and reading up on Captain Shirk's SOR Newswire. Tonight's show is brought to you by Chive Charities. Help make the world 10% happier by visiting Chive Charities today. You can find them on our website. Ross Coulthart is an investigative journalist, most recently for news and current affairs program 60 Minutes on Channel 9. He was previously chief investigations reporter for the Sunday night news program. Coulthart has won 5 prestigious Walkley Journalism Awards, including the most coveted top award for Australian journalism, the Gold Walkley. His broadcast television investigative journalism has also won the top broadcast award, a Logie, but recently Ross has taken the journalistic task of taking on the UFO world. He is one of the rare journalists out there who not only has a platform, but the respect to go after the answers to one of the biggest questions in humanity. Are we alone in this universe? His website, rosscoulthart.com, and his new book is called In Plain Sight, an investigation into UFOs and impossible science. Ross Coulthart, anytime I can get a journalist on the air of your stature, I get all giddy and excited, much like a kid about to go on his first roller coaster. How you doing, my friend?
I'm very well, Dave. I was just laughing as I was hearing your theme music because I genuinely listen to your show when I'm in the gymnasium, and I'm used to lifting weights when I listen to your theme music. So it's quite funny to be talking to you now on live radio.
Well, thank you so much, my friend. And I got to tell you, you have one of those journalistic resumes that 99% of the journalists out there just dream to have. What made journalism so special for you that this was a career path you wanted to follow?
I started out as a lawyer, to be honest, Dave. I graduated as a lawyer and trained briefly as a lawyer, worked briefly as a lawyer. And I was too nosy. I'd always had an inquisitiveness. My father, God bless him, subscribed to some of the world's great newspapers where I lived in New Zealand. And so I grew up reading the London Sunday Times, the New York Times, the Guardian Weekly, and I loved journalism. And I tried to be a lawyer but failed miserably. and ended up becoming a war correspondent briefly. And then I found my way via a beautiful girl to Australia. And I've worked for newspapers and television there ever since. And I love it. It's not easy making a living in journalism, as you would know well, but it's a very gratifying and rewarding profession.
You know, it's one of those careers that, unfortunately, I hate to say this, but the professionalism in it is dying. There are very few investigative journalists left in the world. I know in Canada that it is, they're more, the news outlets here and even in the United States are more interested in clickbait type stories and the size of Cardi B's ass than they are about real stories anymore and digging into the dirty politicians or the corrupt police or even UFOs.
Look, I can tell you I agree with you, and it's funny, it's an argument that I've had with editors and executive producers of TV programs over the years, because I think what's happening at the moment in mainstream media is their audience is diminishing, funnily enough, because of shows like yours. I mean, the reality is the internet has been a boon for special interest investigative podcasts and radio shows like yours, and frankly, it's not a bad thing, because newspapers are a fundamentally dead way of communicating. My daughters don't read newspapers. They mainly communicate via Facebook, and I think they get most of their information on the web. And I work in free-to-air television, making documentaries and long-form films. But the reality is that the audience is getting older. I find when I walk through airports, the people that recognise me are generally over 45. And most young millennial kids haven't actually watched the TV shows that I report for. So I think we just have to accept that it's you know what I think? I actually think to some degree ufology has a bit of a chip on its shoulder about not getting mainstream coverage, when it really should be proud of the fact that there are shows like yours. There are wonderful journalists out there who are doing great work online. And rather than getting upset about the fact that mainstream media has completely dropped the ball on this, I think we have to acknowledge that there are some great bits of work being done out there, and all merit to you, frankly.
So for you, though, I mean, I know from now being in the fringe media, the difficulty to try and bridge the gap between mainstream and the fringe, because the majority of the population here in North America still looks at this topic as very fringe and eccentric. However, we're starting to see a little bit of a shift in that. When you look at the way things are happening down there regarding the UFO topic, how are you being treated, if maybe differently, like George Knapp has over the years?
Well, mate, I can tell you honestly, I've been genuinely heartwarmed and gratified by the level of response that I've had from my mainstream media colleagues, many of whom have invited me onto their shows. After I've done you this afternoon, or this evening your time, I'm going live on Australia's public broadcaster, the ABC, on a show called The Drum, and they're giving me, I think, an hour of conversation about UFOs, unprecedented. And the host of the show is a good friend of mine. She's a very talented author as well. But I think often, frankly, in a lot of journalism, and a lot of the stories I like doing are ones where people go, gee, how did you think of that story? And I think a lot of the problem, frankly, with journalism isn't, there's no editor telling me not to make UFO stories. There's no men in black sitting behind the editor's desk saying, you shall not do a story about retrieved alien spacecraft or whatever. But what there is a taboo, a stigma, a ridicule. And it's interesting. I can remember when I was the chief of staff on a weekend once for the Sydney Morning Herald newspaper, and I was responsible for assigning reporters to stories for the day. And a woman rang up from Western Sydney and told me that she'd just shot a beautiful picture with her film camera of a UFO, of a flying saucer hovering over her home while she was hanging out the washing. And I said to her, look, can you bring it in? I was really excited. I thought, gosh, we'll put this on page 3 or 4 of the Sydney Morning Herald the following day. And I remember the news editor of the day came in, and he was much older than me. I was a 20-something kid, really. And he said to me, Roscoe, we don't do stories about UFOs. They're bloody nonsense. What are you doing? And I said, but how do we know that? How do we know this is nonsense? And it was really interesting, because in journalism I have found there's a stigma and a ridicule and a taboo attached to the subject. When I was at 60 Minutes here in Australia, I I pitched a story, funnily enough, way back in 2016, because a guy called Chris Mellon very kindly agreed to talk to me about UFOs. And we were about to fly from Australia to Washington, D.C. to interview Chris Mellon. And then my executive producer bailed. She got cold feet. And I don't blame her. She was worried about the ridicule and the taboo factor. She thought she didn't know who Chris was. And the irony is, I've often worried, my friend, could I have scooped the New York Times? You know, would Chris have given me the videos that he eventually leaked to the New York Times? Because we were about 6 months before them. But the thing that fascinates me is when I started digging into that stigma and that taboo that is attached to the subject of UFOs, I started to wonder, well, why? Why do we do this? Because the more I started looking, yeah, okay, and I've got to be very careful about this. There are some people who make claims that I think are crazy. And, you know, some psychotic people have rung journalists many, many times over the years claiming that they've had experiences with UFOs that aren't true. But the interesting thing to me is when I started looking in the military archives of our Defence Department, when I started interviewing scientists and civilian aircraft pilots. I've got friends who are Qantas pilots, military pilots. I did a story once for the public broadcaster, a very reputable show called Four Corners, which is, you know, like the most prestigious current affairs show in Australia. And I was doing a story on the Air Force that was not related at all to UFOs. And a very, very senior Air Force officer was showing us around. And at the end of the day, he very kindly offered us a drink in the bar. And he said, can I ask you a question? And I said, yeah, sure. He said, why don't you chaps look at UFOs? And I said, oh, because they're rubbish. It's bullshit. And he went, no, they're not. We've all seen them. And I'm sitting there in an Air Force bar in a RAF base, a Royal Australian Air Force base in Sydney, and he's summonsing over pilots, and they're all telling me their stories about what they'd seen. And they're all doing it over a beer, and I've got a cameraman and a soundo sitting next to me while we're drinking their beer, and I say, look, could we do an interview with you? Oh, God, no. God, no, you'd never talk about this on camera. And I go, well, why? And it was the stigma that was attached to the subject inside the Air Force. And it wasn't that somebody was telling them that they couldn't talk about it. It's just that there is this ridicule and stigma attached to the subject. And I'm sorry, this is a long-winded answer,
Keep
but
going,
I'll take you
friend.
to where I'm going.
I'm loving it.
But what happened in the end was I was drawn by, I think it was a piece from Richard Dolan, actually, where I read his excellent book about the national security state and UFOs. And he pointed out that the origins of the ridicule and the stigma directed at this subject come from a very deliberate disinformation program run by various intelligence services in the United States. And then there's a lovely chap down here, I'm sure you've spoken to him at some stage, Keith Basterfield.
Yes, privately I have.
Yeah. Keith Basterfield put me on to the archives of a lovely fellow who was a former very senior defence scientist for the Defence Department called Harry Turner. And Harry had been a physics professor at Melbourne University, but he got dragooned into the Defence Department during the British nuclear testing in Australia. And because of his physics knowledge, he'd witnessed at the Maralinga test site in a very remote part of far South Australia, in the outback desert, he'd seen craft, UFOs, objects, lenticular-shaped disc craft hovering over these nuclear weapons test sites, clearly taking an interest. And he'd made sure that they were recorded and reported to the aptly named DAFI, the Department of Air Force Intelligence. And these things were filed and largely forgotten about. And I noticed that when I went through the files, the Americans were often the recipient of the information. And it was interesting because Harry, this is, 50 years ago now, he fought a rearguard action to try to get a reaction force inside the Defence Department to investigate UFO incidents. He wanted a ready readiness force to go and deploy from the Air Force any time there was one of these sightings. And he very nearly got support from his bosses. But what happened, and it's interesting in the archives, you can actually see how when the Department of Air Force Intelligence in Australia received this request, they referred it to the Americans. And surprise, surprise, the Americans came back and said, oh, no, don't believe him. It's rubbish. And they actually, because Harry had quoted certain former Air Force officers who'd written books about UFO retrievals in the 1940s and the 1950s, they said he can't, the information that he's relying on to make these assertions that UFOs should be taken seriously isn't real. It's not something that should be supported. And so as a result of that, like a loyal little lickspittle that we often are in Australia with the American ally, we did what our big brother told us, and we basically ignored the subject. And then it's crazy, really, because when I was in Iraq and Afghanistan, I spent a lot of time there with both Australian and American military forces. It was really interesting because there were people there that I spoke to who were involved in surveillance, and they told me that they thought it might be the Iranians, but there were these anomalous objects that were being seen in Iraq particularly, and there were never any explanations for what they were, but they were doing crazy things. And it really struck me how when I really started looking properly, there was a culture of ridicule, taboo and stigma, but also it was very hard to escape the impression that governments were trying to suppress something. And I'm, as you know, Dave, I'm not a huge believer in cover-ups and conspiracy theories because most of the time cover-ups tend to be screw-ups. It's normally a stupid mistake by some public servant who loses a file or, the Raiders of the Lost Ark gets lost in an archive somewhere. But in this case, I am really led to the view that there's quite a body of evidence to show that the United States Air Force particularly, notably AFOSI, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, which is the body that shut down Harry Turner here in Australia, it's played a very key role in suppressing public awareness of the reality of the UFO phenomenon.
True.
And that's why what the Pentagon's done in the last year or so, and notably with this UAP task force report, that's why it's so fascinating that we've now got this backflip from the Pentagon and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, where they're fundamentally saying, look, they are real. They do deserve investigation. They are a flight safety issue, and they are potentially a national security issue. Yes, we think it should be investigated. And I think that's fascinating. And in journo parlance, it's a bloody good story. And I'm going to chase it like a dog on a bone.
Well, I got to tell you, from what I've been able to learn here over the last little bit here regarding the UFO phenomena, there's 5 countries that seem to be tied all together when it comes to UFO reports. It's led by the U.S. Canada is involved with that. So is the United Kingdom, France, and Australia. And from what I have heard from insiders, and that Tim McMillan from the Debrief actually confirmed this with me, is that this group shares every UFO file that comes across their desk, and they are the ones keeping each other in touch. So it would surprise me, Ross, if all of a sudden that we ended up getting some sort of the U.S. calling the shots on this, and then basically telling the rest of the countries that we have some sort of play that has to come in regarding how the information is sent out. Because we know Great Britain isn't talking. We know that the Brits shot it down in Parliament. We know Canada isn't talking at all. France really hasn't said anything, and the Aussies really haven't gone there either.
Well, it's funny. As part of my research, I approached certain federal ministers that have responsibility for the portfolios that you would think would fall under that relationship, that intelligence sharing relationship with the Five Eyes. I've reported a lot on intelligence and national security and terrorism and all the conflicts that Australia has been pulled into in the last 20 or 30 years. And so I know a lot of people in defence and intelligence. And it's interesting because one of my first ports of call was to talk to former defence ministers or people who've been involved in monitoring the intelligence services through oversight committees in our parliament. And I can tell you honestly, the politicians haven't been briefed. I'm very sure of that. I'm sure that the political leaders of our government are not brought into the loop. And it's funny, only 2 days ago, as a result of the documentary that I made here in Australia, I had a contact from the intelligence services who reached out to me, who I was quite surprised to hear from. And he told me that what Tim McMillan had written in the debrief, because I'd made an inquiry, I was chasing up on what Tim had written, because I was surprised, to be honest. I was really interested to hear that there was this intelligence sharing relationship about UFOs between the Five Eyes. And he confirmed what Tim said. He said that they do see UAP reports. And it's interesting, I've been in defence facilities in Australia, and I think one of the things that fascinates me is I don't think the Canadians, Australians and New Zealanders realise just how plugged into the Five Eyes Alliance we are. We are literally getting pretty much all, with the exception of no fawn intelligence, the intelligence that the Americans limit just to American citizens. We are getting pretty much the raw feed from the NSA, the CIA, the DIA, an enormous amount of material. And so, confidentially, one of my anonymous sources in intelligence in Australia confirmed to me just very recently that it is the case. He has seen references to what they call fast walkers, anomalous objects in orbit. And one of the reasons why this is a big issue in Australia, as you'd know, Dave, is because we have this incredible base here in Australia called Pine Gap, which is probably, and I don't want to overstate this, but I'm told it's probably the most important military base for the United States outside of the continental USA. It's very much part of the American strategic nuclear deterrence. And because it's such a sensitive role that it plays, it's a joint facility. But I'm told that the facility, which is jointly operated by Australians and Americans, it regularly picks up objects in space that are anomalous. They're not known space objects. There's also a new space telescope in Exmouth on Northwest Cape in Western Australia, which is also brand new, and it's also picking up anomalous objects. And these data streams are merged with what's called JORN, the Jindalee Over-the-Horizon Radar Network, which is a backscatter radar which bounces electromagnetic signals off the ionosphere. Hasn't worked very well in either Canada, Alaska, or indeed in the southern United States. But for some reason it worked reasonably well here in Australia because we think of the flat outback made it a bit easier to work. But it wasn't very good at picking up MH370. It was turned off at the time, but what it was very good at, and it's turned out, it's secretly become extremely useful for monitoring low Earth orbit. And whilst we spend a lot of time in Australia monitoring the naughty North Koreans who are launching ICBMs and short-range missiles and intermediate-range missiles and monitoring them for the Americans, and we're also keeping an eye on China and Russia. But one of the things that I've learned is that we are also incidentally picking up strange objects that, as one of my sources in the book told me, Bob Fish, he was an aerospace contractor working in communications for a major aerospace contractor in Long Beach in California. And that was one of the places where the data streams from Australia came down. And what he saw was data showing that there were DSP, Defence Support Program satellites. I think they're infrared. But basically, what they showed, what the data that he saw showed, was an object coming from deep space, changing course and changing velocity, and then going into Earth's atmosphere.
Wow.
And this is a guy who's, security cleared to within an inch of his life. Very, very generous man. He gave me permission to use his name, and he actually read and authorized what I wrote for the book.
I'm going to get you to hold on right there. We are going to continue on with Ross Coulthart, journalist extraordinaire. I'm going to tell you, I'm excited about this one. I don't get to geek out much on this show. Tonight I am. Find his book, In Plain Sight, An Investigation into UFOs and Impossible Science, online now. I'm going to get you, if you don't mind, to turn your speaker down just a little bit. We started getting a little bit of feedback.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah, appreciate that. And then I got to...
How's that, Dave? Is it better?
Yeah, much better. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I could go all night with you. Holy shit.
Well, I'm afraid I do tend to talk on a bit. I'm just going to go and get another glass of water.
Yeah.
Have I got time to do that?
Yeah, you have 4.5 minutes.
Sure. Won't be a sec.
Hector, I haven't forgotten your question yet. Thank you for the super chat. I will get to that, and because it falls in with my line of questioning here as well, so I will get to that as well. Ed Clater's here, everyone. Ed Clater, the gorgeous Las Vegas sultry lady Heidi. There she is. And let's see. It is... hold on. It's like 5:30 p.m. in Sydney, Australia right now. And who else do we got here? Carbine's right. How are you? Welcome. Wizard Gren, good to see you again. And I think we're... Dick Daigle's here, everyone. Don't call him a bust after going first overall in the 93 NHL draft. You look comfy.
It's very comfortable. I've just moved house to the Southern Highlands in south of Sydney.
Yeah.
It's beautiful country.
Still lots of animals that could kill you there.
Well, I'm having a wombat problem at the moment. I'm a new farmer, and I've discovered these bloody wombats are digging holes under my fences.
Yeah. That's the last thing you need to worry about with all the snakes and the bugs and the walking great white sharks and the crocodiles.
I've actually swum with a great white shark. It was the most incredible experience. I did it for a TV show. It's an incredible experience.
Yeah, you can do that. You can keep that one. I'm okay with that one. Not me, man. I'm a meal. I don't have one of them gorgeous television bodies. I got a radio body.
You're more tasty than me, mate.
Exactly. Dry Toast is here. Best name on YouTube. How are you, buddy? I really appreciate you doing this, my friend.
That's all right, Dave. It's a pleasure. I'm very gratified for the mentions of the book, and I also feel a strong debt of loyalty to shows like yours because they've been very useful for my research. I mean, some of the people like, the big commentators, the people who have broken much of the story have appeared on shows like yours, and including yours, and it's been great to be able to listen.
It's tough at times because... the one thing that, you walk a fine line, Ross, because in a way you're very appreciative that there's so many knowledgeable people out there who don't get their just desserts and they're willing to come on. If these people were talking dinosaurs or humanity or sports, their brilliancy would be all over mainstream media. But because of what we talk about, they kind of get the shaft on that. But on the flip side, I think a lot of it with the amount of the way, it doesn't matter if it's UFOs, ghosts, sports, politics, the way everybody is taken to podcasting these days, it's kind of watered down the emphasis of trying to build up that giant piece of information that you could have and that the subject does deserve. You know what I'm saying? So it's a real catch-22.
Yeah, I'm optimistic, Dave. I think we're at a tipping point. I'm a member of a group called ICIJ in Washington, and I'm getting a lot of calls from my colleagues who are aware of my book saying, wow, can I talk to you about this?
Yeah.
So I think there's the beginning of interest.
I hope so, because we need it. Reno, welcome to Spaced Out Radio's chat room. Appreciate that. It is fun, though. I mean,
it is fun.
To
it's
talk
great.
about
it's
this
a fascinating
stuff.
subject.
Oh, yeah. It really is. Ross Lambda, good to see you. All right, we got 25 seconds. A big thank you to Jazz, Hector, Apollo, Cherry Pepsi, Mike, Gabe, Mennonite Abe, Sally, Walker, Gary, and Space Cow for the super chats tonight. Really, it's a great way to support what we do on this show on a nightly basis. Thank you to all the veterans out there who are tuning us in as well. Much love to you. Here we go, everyone. Second half hour of Spaced Out Radio is now underway. My name is Dave Scott. Appreciate each and every one of you tuning us on in. Thank you so much for joining us. We want to remind you that if you missed portions of this show or others, check out our free archives by going to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Just do me the favor, hit that subscribe button. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including rocking out to Bumblefoot and reading up on Captain Shirk's SOR Newswire. Follow us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and on Instagram at Spaced Out Radio Show. Award-winning journalist Ross Coulthart is with us tonight. He's got an amazing new book out as he's delved into the UFO world called In Plain Sight, an investigation into UFOs and impossible science. And you can find it online if you're here in North America, and all of our Aussie listeners will definitely recognize Ross from his days on 60 Minutes down there. Ross, welcome back.
It's a pleasure.
I want to ask you, earlier on you said your colleagues in Australia have really patted you on the back for taking on this subject. In journalism, as we talked in the first half hour, there hasn't been a lot of interest in this story when it comes to journalism in general. Yet for you, you're a big enough name in Australia, and you are quickly becoming a major player in journalism in North America here regarding this subject. Why have you decided to take this subject on full force?
Because it's a bloody good story. It's as simple as that. I mean, I'm actually looking over my shoulder wondering, and I've been thinking this for some time, wondering why the mainstream media outlets aren't chasing this more aggressively. I mean, I'm a huge admirer of pages like the Debrief. I've met and spoken with Leslie Kane, and I admire her colleagues, Ralph Blumenthal and Helene Cooper, who've done a lot of the work. I like the way Brian Bender at Politico's had a tilt, and Tom Rogan's one of my favourite reads. There are a few journos in mainstream media that have given this issue a push along, and I think, to be honest, I'm optimistic. I mean, one of the problems, Dave, in journalism is the media tends to think like a pack. And there's often an accepted way of telling a story, and it's very hard to go against the grain. And one of the privileges that I was taught by some very good senior journalists when I first started out was to never take a fact on its face, always test the facts, always check. Always, assess the evidence that you're being fed. And that's fundamentally, and for all its talk, investigative journalism is just that. It's just taking a bit longer to have a long, hard look at why you're saying what you're saying. And, I freely admit that when I started out on this story, I was drawn to the taboo. I was drawn to the idea of a story that people tell me I'm not meant to look at. And I was puzzled. Why? I've been puzzled about that all my journalistic career. Why? And so that's why I was drawn to it. I mean, at risk of courting ire from people who are passionate about global warming science, one of the other great taboos is journalists aren't meant to look at global warming science. And I've thought for years that whilst I believe that anthropogenic human-caused global warming is real, I've thought the mathematical models that are used to support claims about global warming are flawed. And scientists in our Bureau of Meteorology have told me privately that that's the case. And they've voiced concern that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was making scientific assertions about the rapidity of global warming based on mathematical modelling that, frankly, wasn't correct. And I was amused. I woke up this morning and our national newspaper, The Australian, has reported exactly what I've known and felt for quite some time, and which most media has been too timid to report, that there is indeed a problem with the mathematical models behind global warming. And this hasn't been picked up. It hasn't been covered adequately in mainstream media. And the irony is that what that does is undermine public faith in the scientific claims that are being made about global warming, which is a very real issue of concern. And so I feel the same way about UFOs, or UAPs, as some people choose to call them, which is a less loaded term. I think that to stick our heads in the sand and purport that it's nonsense. I mean, I've been laughed at by one very senior columnist in Australia who, when he heard that I was writing a book, he wrote a kind of a vicious column where he said, I hear that veteran investigative journalist Ross Coulthart is becoming a tinfoil hat believer and writing a book about flying saucers and little green men. And I've just ignored him because, frankly, I know what I know. And when people say to me, do you believe in UFOs? I say, look, it's not a bloody religion. It's science. And I said, I'm aware that UFOs, the phenomenon, is real. There are anomalous objects doing strange things in our skies, which the United States Navy, the Pentagon, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, no less, admit is real. They're doing speeds far beyond known human science. They're doing turns, manoeuvres that we just can't do aerodynamically with our aircraft. And if you listen to people like Dave Fravor, the F-18 pilot who had the Tic Tac experience on the USS Nimitz in 2004, Dave says that, and many other pilots tell me as well, that he thinks that this is intelligently controlled and that these are vehicles of some kind. So, frankly, there's enough evidence there to run with. And I think that any journalist that doesn't sit back and go, gee, we should be looking at this because it's a legitimate area for digging.
Right.
They're not doing their job as a journalist.
Well, and that's a point that I always try to bring up, and I would love to get your opinion on this. Why has mainstream journalism been so hesitant to cover this story and continue the plight of the person who believes in UFOs is the night shift worker at the local gas station who believes all conspiracies, has never made more than minimum wage, and does not have a dental plan? I mean, that's kind of the gist of how journalists treat anybody who gets into UFOs. They're not interested in learning the education of some of these people that are really getting into this subject.
Look, I think part of it is in order to get your brain across the material. I mean, I sought counsel from some of Australia's most well-known ufology people, UFO researchers, Keith Basterfield, Bill Chalker, James Rigney in Melbourne. I feel very privileged that I've had people, Paul Dean, I've had people who've actually helped me and explained to me what they know and why they think it's a legitimate area for investigation. And frankly, my view is you always give something a fair hearing. You don't scorn it or ridicule it out of sorts. Some of the best stories, I did a story once which won me the top journalism award in Australia, and I know other journalists had been approached about it. And it was about a doctor who was doing the most dreadful things. He was a gynecologist, and he was doing the most dreadful things to women during surgery. He was mutilating their genitals. And it was appalling. And yet women had tried to get this story told. And I think because it was an icky subject, but also because it was just so preposterous that a surgeon, no less, a man entrusted with looking after women in their most sensitive parts of their body, the fact that he would do this to them was just, to a lot of journalists, too confronting and too ridiculous. And I can remember the person who told me about it at first, I didn't really believe them. I thought it must be an exaggeration. But when I started digging and talking to nurses who'd seen what this creep had done, we ended up getting him sent to jail. And he was convicted and prosecuted, quite rightly, for the horrible offences that he'd committed. And it's interesting. I mean, I think a lot of the problems with the way media cover child abuse is another issue. You know, we have phobias, taboos about things that we don't cover. People are confronted by the idea that there are genuinely evil, bad, mentally ill people in this world who do horrible things sometimes. And sometimes that means that media don't cover issues. I mean, media is not perfect. Editors essentially have the same prejudices that we all have. And one of the things I really value as a journalist when I'm working in a media organisation is a boss who is open to ideas. And I've been so privileged in journalism because I've had a succession of really good bosses who've basically encouraged me to indulge my curiosity, because frankly, that's all journalism is. Journalism's all about storytelling, looking at things that we're all interested in and turning a rock over and having a look what's there. It's not really a science. It's essentially also driven, sadly, by ratings. And that's the other thing I don't understand here, because I have been genuinely blown away by the level of interest. I apologise on your show, Dave, to everybody who has messaged me in the last few weeks since my film went to air about a month ago. I only got back from the States and we were in quarantine, and we turned the film that we were making with Lua Elizondo and Chris Mellon around very, very quickly. And oh my goodness me, I think I've had 11,000 plus messages from people offering me information, military intelligence people, just incredible, solid information coming in the door. And I feel so naughty that I haven't been able to respond because I've been moving house and just dealing with the pressure of getting the book publicity organised. And I promise everybody I'm coming back to them when I can. But I'm really heartened and gratified. And as a journalist, that's what you love. I'm enjoying
Absolutely.
the fact that there is an audience out there that's interested in engaging with me. And the thing I like about it, too, is contrary to what I expected and my initial skepticism, it's an intelligent audience. These are people who are really interested in hearing the basis for things. Like I can see on screen at the moment, there's a guy called Guilherme Ribeiro Tardin Costa who's basically saying he's never seen the videos of UFOs, physics-defying maneuvers mentioned by so many people. And I guess, Guilherme, part of the problem, and I have to explain this to you as a journalist, is what we know about the videos also comes from the backgrounding that people like me have had in my conversations with people in the Pentagon and in various intelligence services, and people who know the science and who've looked at the videos that have been released by the Navy. And for example, the Tic Tac, the reason I know that the Tic Tac was doing aerial maneuvers that were way beyond known human science is because I've also interviewed Kevin Day. And he was, of course, the operator who was operating the combat weapons system on board the USS Princeton, who witnessed on his radar system an object moving from 80,000 feet to above the surface of the ocean in 0.78 of a second. And I've verified what he's told me with 4 other sources. So I don't doubt for a moment that it's real, that this phenomenon is happening. And so that's why I believe these things, because I go in and I check what people say, and then I verify it by talking to other people. And a lot of the time, this is on background. A lot of the time, this is people who agree to speak to me confidentially because they're worried about losing their jobs. And that's 90% of journalism. You
Absolutely.
build sources, you engage, and you build trust with people.
You know, switching the kind of the topic here, in your thoughts, I'm going to give you a scenario here that I think that, you know, mainstream journalism doesn't understand. I think, in my opinion, that mainstream journalism, for the most part, at least here in North America, has never wanted this story. maybe few have, but for the most part, they've never wanted to cover this story. They've never wanted to be a part of it. And all of a sudden, when they found out that this story is real, that the tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorists were right, the government is looking into UFOs, I think that they were caught with their pants down. And the point that I'm getting at now is, though, you would think with all of this coverage that has gone on, that at some point, Ross, the journalists in the journalism field would look into the history. And yet they haven't yet, because if they had, on this D&I report right here, they would have questioned why it only goes back to 2004. Where's Roswell? Where's the Phoenix Lights? Where's Kecksburg? Where's Shag Harbor? Where's Rendlesham?
Where's Westall 1966 in Melbourne? I agree with you. In fact, I've said this, Dave, quite a few times. I'm really worried that there are people in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence who are trying to constrain the narrative. They're trying to make out that, I do think we're headed for some kind of an admission by the Pentagon. I think the WikiLeaks emails that were leaked from the DNC that showed that John Podesta, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, was in contact with Tom DeLonge, unbelievably, even though I just find it so amazing that a punk rocker like Tom was the guy that they were engaging with. But the fact that they were engaging, talking about the potential disclosure of information relating to the UFO issue with Hillary Clinton, General Neil McCaslin, General Michael Carey, Space Command, people in Lockheed Martin, Robert Weiss. These were big hitters. And that was, for me, it's that kind of credibility that pushes me along and makes me go, oh my God, this is why I need to take it seriously. And yes, the media is missing those signposts. It's and part of the problem, Dave, is, and I cheerfully admit this, I can remember ringing friends of mine in Australia and saying, oh my God, did you know about Roswell? And they laugh at me, they go, oh, come on, Roscoe, of course we know about Roswell. And it's funny, it's been a slow revelation to me, because I'll freely admit, I do think the US Air Force has lied and lied and lied about Roswell. There's no doubt about that. The issue is, what are they lying about? Because there definitely was a cover-up. There's been 4 different explanations for Roswell. And, okay, it might be some national security project, but frankly, when you do the analysis, it doesn't wash with me. And I had a similar experience in the documentary where I investigated the Aztec incident, where there's a claim similarly of a retrieved craft. Now, I thought this was all rubbish, and I just laughed when people said to me that, there's a retrieved alien spacecraft, and I still don't know the truth of Roswell, or indeed I can't be certain about any of these incidents. But there was a moment for me where I thought to myself, how the hell am I ever going to research this? Like, how do you, as a journalist, research the issue of whether or not there's been retrieved alien spacecraft? And so I sat down and I thought, well, if I was a scientist or a defense official or an intelligence official, the thing I would be most worried about would be being protected, having my information protected, and making sure that I'm not compromised by being identified by a journalist because I've rung them on the phone, and I'm shocked at how often journalists don't think about the consequences of emailing somebody directly, quoting them as a source, and then wondering why those people get burned as sources. And it's because they've left an electronic trail. And if there's one thing I know from my reporting on the Echelon computer surveillance system, the communications surveillance system, which is a story I broke in Australia, the fact that we actually do this kind of Five Eyes monitoring of telecommunications. I am well aware of how compromised communications are. So I sat down and I wrote letters. I compiled a list of all of the boffins, geeks, defense officials, intelligence officials that I thought might have anything to do at all with black programs, and I wrote letters to them. And one thing I love about America is it's an open democracy, and it allows people access to things like home addresses, private emails, phone numbers. And so I wrote letters to people. I wrote over 100 plus letters to individuals all over North America and indeed around the world, in the hope that some of them, or one of them, might be willing to engage. And for a while, it was during the Sydney bushfires, and there wasn't much to do. It was a bit like what you're going through now. It was just so bloody hot. We stayed inside with the air conditioning, and I just wrote letters all day. But after about 2 or 3 months, I started getting responses. People would call me on my Signal encrypted phone app or my Telegram app or via Proton Mail or PGP encryption. And there was some astounding information there. People were telling me that they were aware of the existence of the program, that the United States was allegedly involved in attempting to re-engineer, back-engineer, retrieved non-terrestrial technology. Now, as a journo, you don't immediately go and publish that and say that's true, because if I was America, I would want my allies to think that I'm really strong, and I'd particularly want my rivals, China and Russia, to think that there's no way they should screw with us. So the best way to do that is to give the impression that you've got top-of-the-line aerospace technology, maybe anti-gravitic propulsion or force field beams and things like that are just completely Star Trek sci-fi concepts, and give them the impression that if they take us on, then America would be able to respond in kind with just overwhelming, as yet undisclosed technology. So I'm wide open to the possibility that it's disinformation. So I'm not in a position to be able to say that I believe that we have definitely recovered non-human technology. But I do think that the evidence suggests that that may well be the case. Because when you have people like Chris Mellon hinting at it, Lou Elizondo flatly asserting exotic technology, one of my sources who went on the record in the book, Nat Kovitz, gee, wow, a senior geek for the US Navy, one of the top scientists in the US Navy. He headed their research and development, their science and technology development for the US Navy. Sadly, I got him at a time when he was dying of cancer. Beautiful man, but I think because of his imminent mortality, he was wide open to the possibility of talking to me. And we had the most magnificent conversations for many weeks. And then at the end of a series of long chats, I asked him, are you aware? Have you ever been read into any so-called UFO crash retrieval programs? And I didn't really expect him to respond. I expected him to do what most of us expect them to do, which is to ridicule it and laugh at the idea. But he didn't. He said yes. And that led me on the most extraordinary journey where I now think it is possible. I can't say for sure, but I do think it's possible that the US and other countries have retrieved non-human technology. And that's mind-blowing.
We got 90 seconds. We got 90 seconds. Quickly, do you think that at Pine Gap there are alien technologies and or bodies there?
No, I don't. No, I really don't. I can tell you that there have been anomalous objects seen in that facility, but there's some really wacky stuff that I've heard of claims of huge underground chambers and alien experiments. I have seen no evidence to support that. None at all. I'm not saying it's not true. I just don't know, and I've seen no evidence to support it.
Much to your chagrin.
I'd love it.
I would love it too, my friend. I mean, that's kind of what it's all about, you know. But when we come back from the break, I want to ask you, and I'll give you the break to think about it, because I get a lot of questions, like Hector in our chat room tonight. Why is the government covering it up? What are they covering up to the point that they are trying to control the narrative? And I think that is an important topic to get into when we come back from the break, because to me, this opens up an entire world of all the UFO conspiracy theories that are out there. Because if they're not willing to tell us anything prior to 2004, I strongly believe that it opens up a lot of questions into what is real and what has truly happened, because it only means they're hiding secrets. and that's kind of where I want to go with that, if you don't mind.
I'd be very happy to do that.
Yeah, we're going to have some fun with that. Our guest tonight on Spaced Out Radio, the legendary Ross Coulthart. He's an award-winning journalist out of Australia. He has dipped his toes but fell in fully into the UFO pool. He prefers UFOs over UAP. Thank God we got somebody on our side for this one. He's got a great book out, which can be found online. In Plain Sight, an investigation into UFOs and impossible science. We return with hour number 2 with Ross Coulthart right after this on Spaced Out Radio. I spilled my iced tea all over my desk while you were speaking. I've been sitting here for 20 minutes with iced tea all over my desk and keyboard. I'll be right back. We got 6 minutes.
I'll be right back too.
Right.
Is it a 4-minute break again?
About 6.
Okay, no problem.
Right.
Thank you.
There he is. I'll go here, put his mic on mute. I'll be right back, guys. I got to get a towel. All right. Now I can clean up my mess here. Give me 2 seconds here, Ross. Cleaning up my mess here. My
I'm
goodness.
grabbing some lunch while I'm talking to you.
Oh, you go right ahead. What are you eating today?
Cheese and pickle.
Oh, very nice. Very nice.
So, what is it up there? It's summer where you are, isn't it?
Yeah, and we're about to go back into about 96, 97 degree temperatures here, which isn't going to be good for the forest fires, but oh well.
Do you live anywhere near Vancouver Island? I love the island.
I live about, I actually started my radio career on Vancouver Island in a place called Parksville. And I stayed on the island for 2 years. It's a gorgeous place. I hated every minute I lived there. It just was, I always felt really trapped there. And it never felt like home. And so I moved back to the mainland and started radio in Vancouver. I got a job in a sports department there, which is what I really wanted to do in the first place. So, but I'm about an 8-hour drive from Vancouver Island.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. That's 96, 97 in Fahrenheit. I always say Fahrenheit because most of our listeners are in the U.S. Science Bob, thank you for that amazing super chat. I really do appreciate that, Science Bob. And thank you, Beverly, Guillermo, Jazz, Hector, Apollo, Cherry Pepsi, Mike, Gabe, Mennonite, Abe, Sally, Walker, Gary, and Space Cow for the awesome super chats. We're going to kick off hour 2 here momentarily. And we got a lot of people buying your books. Hey, Ron, good to see you. Thanks for coming on in. Hi, Jim Morris. Good morning to you. And here we go.
You're listening to Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott. Follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and on Facebook, Spaced Out Radio Show.
Here we go with hour number 2 of Spaced Out Radio tonight. My name is Dave Scott. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We really do appreciate earning your listening ears wherever you are on this beautiful planet we call Earth. Thank you so much to everybody tuning us in on our terrestrial affiliates around North America and digitally on TalkStream Live, Revolution Radio, and KPNL. All of our archives are free by going to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Just do me the favor, hit that subscribe button. The Desert Clam has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club, Nanocephalus. Nanocephalus is your password. Use it wisely, space travelers, as the Clam sets the password each and every night right here on Spaced Out Radio. Our website, spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including rocking out to Bumblefoot and reading up on Captain Shirk's SOR Newswire. Follow us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and on Instagram at Spaced Out Radio Show. We continue on tonight with award-winning journalist out of Australia, Ross Coulthart, and he has a brand new book out which can be found online all about UFOs called In Plain Sight, an investigation into UFOs and impossible science. Ross, welcome back.
Nice to be here.
I want to get to a question that Hector posed earlier, and that is the cover-up that the governments are doing. What is the purpose of this, do you think?
Well, I'm not convinced that everything's a cover-up all the time. I think sometimes it's purely and simply that governments don't like admitting that they understand something. I think that all of us believe that our military, and we like the idea of thinking that our military is omniscient, and a lot of America's sense of itself since World War II has been based on hegemony, military dominance. And a lot of the philosophy of America's military doctrine is that it remains the dominant world superpower. And if you think about it, whatever this technology is, it represents an implicit challenge to that notion. Because in and of itself, these are allegedly intelligently controlled craft that are doing things far beyond known technology. They're outperforming the best F-22, the best F-35, the best Sukhoi. They are incredible craft, if they are craft. And if I was the American military, I wouldn't be in a hurry to admit that something else has military dominance over us. So that, to me, is one plausible explanation, that rather than there being any huge sinister reason that they're covering up, maybe it's as simple as they just don't like admitting that there's something better than them.
But there's also a lot of secrets that go along with that. And as I stated right before the break, when you shut down a report that you're not going previous to 2004, yet the public knows everything from Roswell on forward here in North America, it really, really states the fact that there is more to this subject that, to me, if I use my journalistic spidey senses, my first question is, what are you covering up? Why are you covering it up? And what is the purpose of this cover-up?
Well, let's go to this. Let's assume for a moment, hypothetically, let's assume that the United States does have recovered alien spacecraft. Big call, but let's make that assumption.
Sure.
And let's assume that, as Dr. Eric Davis has said in quite a number of podcasts, they've been trying to back-engineer that technology right through the Cold War since they recovered these craft in the 1940s. Let's assume that's true. Let's assume, though, that what Dr. Davis has said is true, which is they haven't been able to replicate that technology because it's just so awesome. It's so far beyond known human technology that we just can't replicate it. If I was America, if I was the US, I would keep that secret. I would try and keep that advantage as long as possible, because you don't want to alert your strategic rivals, Russia, China, to the fact that you have this technology. Now, I think that's a plausible hypothetical explanation for the possibility that America does have retrieved technology, which a number of reputable people have asserted it does. And you know, as a mainstream journalist, I'd be derelict in my responsibility if I didn't think about the possibilities, the hypotheticals, if that scenario is correct. Now, I have to balance that with the fact that the White House has issued a formal denial. It's categorically stated in a press release in 2011 that there is no such retrieved alien spacecraft. There is no contact with extraterrestrials. So you have to take that into consideration. And I guess I ask myself, well, why would they lie about it, if hypothetically they are? I think they'd lie about it if they're still trying to replicate that technology and they want to preserve that strategic advantage as long as possible. Now, I got told when I was in the United States in April and May doing my own research, I was told by people who would be in a position to know that the Russians have recovered non-human technology. Now, I don't know the truth of that, but there are certainly claims that have been made as well in Russian media and on certain Russian research sites. I'm also told that the Chinese don't have recovered craft or technology, but they're desperately trying to get hold of it. So if you think about the fact that whoever controls that technology would essentially be the dominant military power on this planet, probably for many, many hundreds of years to come, because it's such a light speed, such a light year jump in what is technologically possible. I would hold on to that secret as long as possible. And I just earnestly hope, frankly, as a friendly ally of America and who knows the good intentions of most of the people that I've met in defense and intelligence in the United States, I sincerely hope that it's America that has control of that technology if it exists. Because I dread to think what would happen if President Xi of China or that nutcase Putin in Russia was involved in controlling technology like this. You know, the GRU, the Russian military intelligence service, has left a bloody trail across Europe, murdering Vladimir Putin's rivals and critics. And the idea that somebody like that could control such powerful technology fills me with horror. So I sincerely hope it is the United States. But I suspect also, let's continue this hypothetical. if it is the case that they've recovered this technology, the reasons for keeping it secret are beginning to diminish. Because frankly, it's becoming unsustainable to claim that you don't have this technology, because slowly the secrets are emerging. And I think the significance of the Salvatore Pais patents, Dr. Salvatore Pais, or Pais, I'm not sure how you say it, and I apologize to him if I've mispronounced his name. But I'm talking about the US Navy patents, where the US Navy has asserted that it has operable technology that, frankly, should be the stuff of Star Trek. You know, claims are being made in patent applications by the US Navy that they have achieved breakthroughs in propulsion technology, transmedium vehicles, force field generators. And when those claims were challenged by the Patent Office, some of those claims were supported by James Sheehy, who was the commander of the Naval Research Laboratory that was supporting this research. So there is definitely something going on in America. And the thing I just find gobsmacking is there's all these clues left along the way that if I was the Pentagon's defense reporter, I would regard this as legitimate a question to be asking as I would a question about Afghanistan or Iraq. You know, it's clear that the United States is working in the black on anti-gravitic propulsion, on force field generators, on extraordinary claims that it's been making about fusion generators, energy generators. These claims are on the public record for anyone to find. And I think it's interesting because it's incumbent now on mainstream media to start digging and asking questions about it. And frankly, I don't know why they're not already. They should be. And I certainly intend to do so.
I understand that, but to me it opens up a lot of different conspiracy theories. Okay, whether it's the questioning of did Bob Lazar work at Area 51, to did Eisenhower meet with extraterrestrials in the early 1950s and trade humans for technology. Now, for a lot of people who are in the UFO field, that may sound like sheer lunacy, both of those subjects, because of the magnitude of what has been said. But because of what's going on now and the fact that there has been a deliberate exemption of the UFO subject prior to 2004, the USS Nimitz incident, I do believe that those questions come up for trial in case there is something more that they are hiding that they do not want to get into.
Well, let's assume for a moment, Dave, that a Pentagon general has presided over an awesome cover-up. And he or she knows that if this is revealed, if it's forced out in congressional hearings, their reputation is going to be traduced. They're going to be revealed as a liar who's possibly lied to presidents, lied to the Congress, avoided the oversight of the Senate Intelligence Committee and all the other oversight agencies like your Inspector General. There are possibly crimes that have been committed. If I was certain people in the military or intelligence services, or I suspect where it is more likely, private aerospace, I would actually be trying to keep this secret as long as possible. And that's why I think you've got a point when you suggest that the ODNI task force report is essentially an attempt to constrain the narrative from 2004, because all of these allegations of craft retrievals and contact with extraterrestrials, however credible they may be, they've all been made prior to 2004. And it's clever because the public, I suspect, would be open to the possibility of the Pentagon making a limited disclosure in, say, I don't know, 1 or 2 years, where they say, hey, listen, now that we've done our work and the UAP task force has done a bit more digging, we've realised, yes, it is real, and look, maybe just possibly this is extraterrestrial. And that's not much further than what they've already said. As you know, they've already indicated the possibility of extraterrestrial life as an explanation for what we're talking about, but they've only considered it as one possibility. But what if, in their effort to constrain the narrative, what they're trying to do is prepare the public for an admission without making any admission about retrieved technology, because that's the holy grail. That's the one thing you don't want to let go of. I find that a plausible explanation for why we've got this constraining of the narrative, if you like, around 2004 to the present. And it's interesting because just this morning I had an email exchange with a person who told me about an article that they'd seen. They're a former submariner, and they'd seen an article in the debrief about underwater submerged objects. And they told me, they encouraged me to look at a technology that apparently the Americans have located at key points in the Pacific and Indian Oceans, where you can measure the electromagnetic effect of a submarine moving through water. And it's not acoustic, because the Russians have got very clever at keeping their submarines super quiet. It's essentially a technology that can track the movement of a large metallic object magnetically. That's as best as my Luddite brain can deal. But essentially it was explained to me that they were aware that what the debrief was saying was true, and that whilst they'd been in service in submarines in the 1980s, they were aware that this technology had actually picked up objects underwater doing hundreds of knots. Large objects, not torpedoes. And that's interesting because that's obviously far faster than any technology that we know of in any human arsenal. But, you know, if you're the US and you know that there is such technology operating underwater and it's dominant to yours, or maybe you're testing it, I don't know, you'd want to keep it as quiet as long as possible. And that's what I suspect is going on. If it is true that they've recovered technology, if it is true that they're working on this in the black, it may be why people who've spoken to me have seen weird things over places like Northwest Cape in the most remote part of Western Australia. You know, you couldn't go to a more remote part of the world than WA. And the timing was interesting because I start my book with the story of this woman who was leaving an American base in 1991 at a time when I know my friend and colleague George Knapp had basically exposed the extraordinary allegations about Area 51 and the claims of Bob Lazar. Let's assume, hypothetically, Lazar was correct. Let's assume that he was telling the truth. And I noticed Dave Fruhoff, a former U-2 pilot who worked at Area 51, gave some credibility to those claims. I'm not discounting them. But let's say it just got too hot for the Americans to test stuff in the Nevada testing range. Where would you go? Well, you'd probably go to a friendly ally like Australia, and you'd say, guys, can we use our base up in Northwest Cape for a few things that we're testing? And were it not for the fact that some idiot flying the thing buzzed an Australian woman who was driving along a road late at night and also was seen by multiple locals. And I've spoken to so many people who saw this black triangular object hovering over Northwest Cape. They might have got away with it. But I'm in no doubt whatsoever that the Americans are fully aware of whatever it was that was hovering over Northwest Cape in 1991. And that poses some very interesting questions for me because it raises the possibility, if not the probability, that things are being tested in the black, that are advances on technology way beyond our understanding. And I sincerely hope that's true. Because the only other plausible explanation is it's one of our rivals that was buzzing the base, like China or Russia. And God, I hope that's not true. Or it's not human.
And that's the main thing. What is it? Where is it coming from? But do you not think that this also opens up the doors to the fact that there could be possible communication that's already happened? Because that question needs to be asked too, which hasn't been.
Yeah, look, I love that movie. It was a fictional retelling of the Eisenhower meeting, the 11th Green. I actually exchanged communications with the director. I recommend it to people to watch because essentially it's a fictional retelling of the claims that Eisenhower had a secret meeting with aliens at an Air Force base in California. And I just don't know. I mean, as a journo, I restrict myself to what I can investigate. There's the other story, too, about Nixon showing a show business personality, alien bodies in Florida, I think it was. Yeah. I just don't know. I mean, I can't test those claims. But what fascinated me as a journalist is I asked myself, well, where can I be useful? Where can I usefully get information? And I owe an apology, by the way, to people who claim to have been abducted. I didn't mean in a recent interview to infer that people who were abducted were all crazy. I was talking specifically about one person who'd contacted me who turned out to be psychotic. But I can't investigate the issue of abduction. I just don't know how to investigate it unless I'm there and I see somebody being abducted, or unless I have an admission from a government official that this is happening. It's almost impossible for me to actually get to the bottom of it. But what I can do is I can look at sighting phenomena and I can track what people are sighting, and I can ask the question, well, why were we seeing multiple people seeing black triangular objects off the northwest coast of Australia at a certain period in our history? Multiple people, military witnesses, base deputy commanders. These are people of credibility. And why were the Americans so anxious to cover it up and conceal it? Were they testing technology up in Northwest Cape? I suspect they were. And that, to me, is where I can usefully start digging. And that's what I've tried to do in my book, is limit myself to where I can be useful. And I'm a huge admirer of Tim McMillan, for example, with the great work he's been doing with the debrief. I mean, I thought the research that he did into things like the claims about the Admiral Wilson document, the TTSA, the goings and froings about whether or not the Pentagon did have a secret UAP task force investigating UFOs. I mean, for the life of me, the lies and the deceit that were coming from the Pentagon spokespeople in an effort to try and dampen down an awareness of this issue were just hilarious. And the way they tried to denigrate Lou Elizondo by suggesting that he wasn't in a managerial role or an oversight role. And I loved the painstaking way with which Tim picked apart those lies. And frankly, we should be doing that. We should be testing and skeptical and getting to the truth of things, because I do think that there are people that I know that there are people who are trying to stop the level of openness, the level of transparency here. And I like to think that they're doing it for good reasons. They're doing it because they're patriots. They believe that America should be the dominant military power, and I do. I don't think that we should allow ourselves to be weak against authoritarian governments. And there's a huge risk at the moment. I don't think people realise just how precarious the international security situation is. I have sources in Australia in defence who don't talk about if there's going to be a war with China, but when there's going to be a war with China. And I dread to think about the possibilities of that. So if the US is developing technology in the black, I bloody well hope so, and I wish them the very best. And I'd love to see it out there, but I think that the capacity for them to hold on to this for as long as they have is becoming implausible, if that's the case.
Where do we go from here? As we have about 90 seconds before we go to the break, and we may have to all of a sudden carry this over to the other side of the break. But where do we go? What do we need to see? What do we need to happen, Ross?
We definitely need congressional hearings. The only way to bring this out is to bring out the sterilising disinfectant of sunlight. If people have lied and deceived, we need to know if they've done it for the best motives. Because governments lie all the time. We just need to know why they've been lying, because they have. We just need to understand why they've been covering up, because they have. That's the big thing, and we can only do that with the power of the Congress.
How can that help for people who don't understand?
Okay, well, I covered as a journalist the Iran-Contra hearings in your Congress when it was revealed that under the Reagan administration, ostensibly without the knowledge of the then President Ronald Reagan, we were doing deals with the Iranians for weapons that could then be transshipped to the Contras to support the anti-communist activities in Nicaragua. It was a totally misconceived and illegal operation that was done without the authorization of the United States. And interestingly enough, people don't realize their history. One of the people who was in the Senate Intelligence Committee staff at the time was Christopher Mellon. And this is the issue. You've got leading the UAP transparency issue a person who is experienced in exposing dark secrets, somebody who's very, very good at finding mistruths. And he tells me, and he's said publicly many times, that he's not aware of any active back engineering program inside the US government, and he was in a position to know if there were retrieved alien materials.
Oh, this conversation is going at 1,000,000 miles an hour. We are flying through space, learning where are them aliens. Ross Coulthart, award-winning journalist, continues with us on Spaced Out Radio right after this. I hope I'm doing you some journalistic justice here tonight.
That's very kind of you. No, Dave, you're doing good. I'm just, to be honest with you, I'm taking what you give me and running with it in the areas that I think are most interesting for you and your listeners. I hope it's going where you want.
Oh, it's going beautifully. Beautifully.
Oh, good.
I'm going to try and include some audience questions when we come back here, because I know they're starting to build up in the chat room, and I've skipped a few of them accidentally. But if our audience, when we come back from break, if you're in our YouTube chat, just type the questions in capital letters. It's easy for me to find, and that way I can ask Ross your question. So let's get that going here. But yeah, I love this topic. I could listen to you all day. I think we're all kind of smitten with your voice, and all hail the Commonwealth for us here.
Have I got 5 minutes, mate?
Yeah, about 4.5.
No problem. Cheers.
Ross has another interview right after this, so I don't think he's going to stick around past that point. Let me see something here. Oh, gosh. We got the round table tomorrow night, and I still haven't invited anybody. My goodness. I better do that. I forgot tomorrow night's round table night. Holy cow. I better do that here. I thought I had a week to go here. Wow.
So what are the big sports? Ice hockey up your way, Dave?
Yeah. I don't know if you can call it hockey anymore. They're sure pussifying the game so much. It's terrible.
And is it basketball during the summer?
Up here where I live, basketball's kind of more of a winter sport. A lot of people play baseball. Unfortunately, there is a giant contingent out there that thinks soccer is a sport and that it's healthy. In reality, it's just a mean portion of the Antichrist that the Antichrist has put on this planet.
Oh, you're inviting ire from a large part of your audience.
That's okay. I could fight that one every time. There's a reason why they call soccer a beautiful game, because it's not a sport. Hi, GF, and hi, Smoky Mountain Wanderer. How are you? Edens, how are you, my friend? Good to see you. Yeah. Hello, Terrence in Toronto. What's it like thinking that 1967 was the last time your team won the Stanley Cup? That has to not feel good. I would sooner have 0 than a 52-year drought. Just saying. That's me. Joe Smith, what's happening? Hey, Terrence, we're going to talk soon, buddy. Hey, Preston Dennett, or Beckett, how are you? Good to see you. All right, Guillaume, your question, or Guillaume, pardon me, your question's going to be first. And I've got the chat room stalled right there. We've got about 35 seconds here, Ross. I really appreciate you doing this.
No problem. Very happy to do it.
Yeah, it's because I'm part of the Commonwealth. That's why. You should come up here when it's cold.
I have. I've been in Calgary.
Then you know. Cold.
I was investigating your outlaw motorcycle gangs.
Yeah, that was a good story. That was a good story. All right, my friend.
The Rock Machine.
10 seconds. Here we go, everyone. Thank you for the super chatters, and let's rock right now. We passed the halfway point on Spaced Out Radio tonight. Thank you so much for tuning us in. My name is Dave Scott. Really appreciate earning your listening ears. Want to remind you that if you missed portions of this show or others, check out our free archives by going to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Just do me the favor, hit that subscribe button. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including rocking out to Bumblefoot and reading up on Captain Shirk's SOR Newswire. Follow us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and on Instagram, Spaced Out Radio Show. We continue on talking with award-winning investigative journalist Ross Coulthart out of Australia. He's taking on the UFO subject, as well as he's got a great book that can be found online, In Plain Sight, an investigation into UFOs and impossible science. We're going to get to some audience questions right now for you. We're going to start with Guillerme, a good Canadian kid as well. When do you think we are going to know the truth, he is asking?
I think a lot later than we expect. I don't share the optimism of my friend Steve Bassett that we're going to have hearings in the Congress within a few months. I think the pandemic has slowed things down. I'm aware, I've been talking to certain staffers in the Congress for both senators and congressmen, and one of my concerns is, I think with everything else that's happening in the world at the moment, there is a risk that unless the public squeal and demand these hearings, they're not going to happen. And so it's incumbent, I think, on everyone listening to this. I actually think congressional hearings are vital. I've spoken to military witnesses who've told me that they are on the lists of people who will be called to testify in the event that there are open, transparent, public congressional hearings. But there's a concern, I know, and I think both Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon have hinted at this, that perhaps the impetus for congressional hearings is fading. And that suits, frankly, the dark forces of the US Air Force that would quite like to sit this all back in a box for another 76 years. We have an opportunity here, ladies and gentlemen. We have an opportunity to push open the door, to let the crack open a little. But we can only do that. And one of the things I feel passionately about is, Dave, you called yourself a fringe show before, fringe media. You're not. You actually have a higher circulation, a higher listenership and viewership than most national newspapers. Your audience has clout. And all of these people who are listening to this now, I beg you, write a letter to your congressman or your member of parliament and ask for hearings. Ask your government about this issue. Engage. Because the only way you can make it an issue, there's a great, I studied political science for a while, and my teacher was a guy called Les Cleveland, and he said his immortal quote was, "The wheel that squeaks gets the grease." And honestly, you guys need to squeak. People need to speak up and say that they want these hearings. Because I can tell you, the moment they happen, people I know, and people that Lua Elizondo, Christopher Mellon know, will testify, and it'll all come rolling out.
All right, some questions have been kind of building up here in regards to the Five Eyes. For people who don't know what the Five Eyes are, could you go into some detail about that?
In the wake of World War II, it became clear that there'd been a wonderful relationship between the Commonwealth countries and America, basically fighting a common adversary, Adolf Hitler and the Japanese. We shared intelligence, and General MacArthur was for a long time based in Australia. He actually fled the Philippines and came down through Central Australia and eventually ended up having a base in Brisbane, in Queensland, in Australia. And because of that, intelligence relationships were created, particularly in the field of communications interception. And this was the origin of the so-called Five Eyes Alliance. And one of the stories I'm most proud of as a journalist is I procured the first ever admission by a member of the Five Eyes Alliance, Australia's then Defence Signals Directorate, DSD, now the Australian Signals Directorate, ASD. They, under pressure, gave me a formal admission to the existence of the so-called Echelon Computer Surveillance Communications Spying System, which essentially involves the Five Eyes countries, Australia, New Zealand, Canada and the USA, to essentially collaborate in sharing intelligence from intercepted communications, which sounds dirty, but frankly, during the Cold War, it was absolutely vital that we know what our potential adversaries, Russia and China, and indeed also North Korea, are up to. So there are friends of mine in Canberra, which is the capital of Australia, who sit all day and listen to North Korean generals lining up dates with their mistresses. And essentially we're procuring information as part of that Five Eyes Alliance in league with the National Security Agency in America, GCHQ in the UK, CSE in Canada, and in Australia our ASD. And what we do is we essentially share intelligence between the Five Eyes. And that has broadened. You know, the Five Eyes Alliance has broadened beyond simple communications surveillance to space-based surveillance, where Australia does a lot of work at places like Pine Gap and the Space Telescope at Exmouth. And all these data streams are shared between the mutual partners. And it's why Tim McMillan's right, that the Five Eyes are sharing information, albeit incidentally, on UAPs, because all that data stream is merged between the nations and they share it amongst each other. I do know, though, that just to respond to what Tim had raised, that essentially all that Five Eyes Alliance stuff on UAPs is shared, I do suspect that the Americans are holding back on some of the better intelligence, you know, the real detail of what they know. And we've had a big hint of that, I think, with the so-called Admiral Wilson memo, which I give a lot of credibility to. This memo which suggests that somewhere in private aerospace, if there is retrieved non-human material, it's being concealed in the private realm to keep it out of the reach of oversight agencies in the US government. But Five Eyes generally is an incredibly useful and beneficial spying alliance, essentially, to allow collaboration between some of the democratic countries in the world.
All right. Let's go over to Twitter, where at UFO Study is asking, Ross, do you have the picture of the lady who saw a UFO hovering over her house in Australia?
I wish. No, that's over 30 years ago now. And I have to admit, I very guiltily and ruefully admit this, that once my editor gave me the edict that this wasn't a story, I told the lady to forget about it. And Lord knows what happened to her information. But I should have taken it more seriously, and I regret that I didn't do so.
Nicola is asking, Ross, what do you think of Avi Loeb and his new Galileo project?
Well, firstly, isn't it wonderful to have a scientist doing what scientists are meant to do, which is skeptical, rigorous questioning? You know, I think, I wish I could quote it off the top of my head, but the other day, Avi Loeb wrote a deliberately provocative rejoinder to that Carl Sagan quote about extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And it was, you know, he was essentially bouncing back against the establishment mainstream science. And frankly, I think Neil deGrasse Tyson is as guilty of this as most of these scientists that are doing this, which is to treat the issue of UAPs with disdain and ridicule rather than to seriously engage. And I'm refreshed by the fact that somebody of the incredible caliber of Avi Loeb is prepared to speak out. And I just hope what happens to him isn't what happened to that scientist Mack, who was castigated and vilified in his time at Harvard University for speaking out on the UAP issue. I think that it takes bravery for a scientist to go against the grain. Indeed, to a lesser extent, it takes a bit of courage, I guess, for a member of the media to go against the ridicule and taboo and stigma that's attached to the subject in the media. You know, ultimately, you've just got to sit back and go, as Avi Loeb has done, and as people like Kevin Knath have done, and is it Michael Masters, the anthropologist?
Yes.
You know, there are a number of key scientists who've done some really interesting work where they're intellectually engaging with this subject. They're taking it seriously. And that's all anyone's asking, rather than just giggling. And I just tire every time, and I've done a few of them in the last few weeks, every time you do a TV or a radio interview and some twit runs the X-Files music behind the interview, or runs woo-woo music or flying saucers rising off the planet's surface. It infuriates me because it's inviting the audience to belittle the subject. So, yeah, I think what Avi Loeb's doing is fantastic, and I applaud the Galileo project. I wish I knew who the anonymous benefactor was who's given him $1.5 million, but I wish somebody would do that to support the investigation of investigative journalism in UAPs, because it's a tough and lonely game, frankly.
I would be there with you, my friend. I would be there with you. I would dust off my notepad just for you. Maybe even bring out an old microphone flash, you know. You never know. No, and I think that's really brilliantly put, to be absolutely honest about the history. Let's get over to Jules here, who is asking, Ross, have you ever talked to Aborigines about UFOs, and what is their thoughts?
Look, I have, and I was way up once for a story completely unrelated to UFOs in the Gulf of Carpentaria, which is a massive empty part of Australia, but which is covered by the Northern Territory and North Queensland. And we were doing a story about a mining company that was showing us what it does to protect Aboriginal sacred sites, because an enormous effort is made to make sure that we don't, even though some mining companies have done the wrong thing, that we don't damage sacred sites that are precious to the Indigenous Aboriginal people. And in the course of my research, while we were filming, a helicopter pilot introduced me to a beautiful Aboriginal man called Blue Bob, who was called Blue Bob because he was so dark, he was almost blue. He was an incredible, wise, knowledgeable, venerable elder Aboriginal man. And the helicopter pilot said to me with awe, he said, Ross, you watch. And we sat in the back of the chopper and just watched. He didn't use GPS to find where he was going. He had something in his brain that allowed him to tell the chopper pilot where to go. He'd just go, go that way, go that way. And the chopper pilot would head off and he'd go, you can't mine here. This is precious to us. And you'd see this outcrop of rock. And I'm sitting next to a geophysicist with his magnetic imaging maps, and he's pulling his hair out because he's going, oh my God, how did he know that? Because the guy was literally hovering above an area of ore that was so valuable and so precious, and the mining company had found this during its investigations and wanted to know if it was known to the Aboriginal community. And of course, this guy just somehow innately knew that. And so that night around a billabong, I sat there with Blue Bob and I said, how do you know this stuff? And he told me it was the oral history, the dream time stories of the Aboriginals. And it's easy to mock this, but frankly, when you see it up close, it's quite awe-inspiring. And you realize they really do have an understanding of the environment and the natural world that goes far beyond ours. And I think your Indigenous American have the same experience. But what I then asked him, I said, have you ever seen the Min Min lights? And these are lights that were seen by European settlers, starting first in a town called Min Min in Queensland in the 1870s. And these weird lights, many settlers described them, these kind of orbs of light that would seem intelligent. They'd come towards you, they'd hover around the campsite for a while, then they'd zoom off. And they're very much part of Aboriginal mythology and folklore. So I asked Blue Bob, I said, Blue Bob, the local ABC News, the radio, I hear on the radio the other day that the ABC News is saying that there's an explanation from scientists for the Min Min lights. They're saying they're truck headlights and they're reflecting off moisture in the air at night. And Blue Bob looked at me like I was stupid. And I felt quite silly at the bottom of it because he said, there weren't no trucks around 3,000 years ago. and the Min Min lights were part of Aboriginal Dreamtime stories going back thousands of years. They've been around for an eternity in Aboriginal mythology. And we don't know what they are, but I was only reading a paper this morning by an academic about the Wandjina people. And many people who have been privileged, like I have, to go up to the Kimberley in far northwestern Australia, would have seen these beautiful rock paintings of, frankly, what look like grey aliens, big eyes, big heads. And the Wandjina people are part of Aboriginal culture and mythology. And they are beings that came from another world and engaged gods with the Aborigines. And the paper I was reading this morning was talking about that link in Aboriginal mythology and culture and speculating about what it was the Aborigines saw tens of thousands of years ago. So yes, I have engaged with the Aboriginal people and bless them, they know a hell of a lot more than we do about our environment here.
I think we have, as investigators and scientists, dropped the ball completely on learning more about maybe ET contact, definitely creatures like Sasquatch or the Yahweh where you are, because we don't want to pay attention to what the Indigenous people say. That is my, like around where I am, Ross, about 45 minutes away, we have one of the largest reservations in British Columbia, the Cannon Lake First Nation. And I was blessed a couple years ago to talk to one of the retired chiefs from there. And I was asking him about Sasquatch one day. And he goes, no, we don't get a lot of Sasquatch around here. And then he kind of puts his head down and then he mumbles, but I sure wish the star people would leave us the hell alone.
Yeah. Well, there's similar stories that you'll get in Aboriginal culture. And one of the things I'm fascinated, I was up in Arnhem Land not too long ago, way up in the Northern Territory, just to the right of Darwin. And you have to get special permission to go in there if you're not Aboriginal. And it was fascinating because a lot of the art that's done up there, they do beautiful rock paintings on canvas and paper. And a lot of the art that they do portrays UFOs, flying saucers. And I asked somebody up there once, I said, why are you drawing that? And he goes, we paint what we see. We paint what we see.
Very true. Very true. Kat here, who's a good Canadian kid as well, she has a great podcast called The Paranormal Heart. She's asking, what made you become an investigative journalist, and what is the favorite topic you have covered?
Oh, actually, that's a very good question. I've always been fascinated with intelligence and national security. And I think along with UAPs, UFOs, I really enjoyed a story I did recently about mobile phone hacking, because we all have these mobile phones. And what amazed me was I came across a former technical expert in our intelligence services who was aware of a flaw in mobile phone telephony called SS7, Signalling System 7. And people don't know this. You know, whenever people talk about the threats to mobile phones, there was recently a big expose about the Pegasus tapping that a company called NSO, an Israeli company, is using to tap into mobile phones remotely. And allegedly, it's being abused by the governments of certain Middle Eastern countries to attack political opponents. And it's been used for nefarious purposes, such as the effort to track Jamal Khashoggi, the poor fellow who was cut into pieces in Turkey by the UAE government, I think it was. But or the Saudi, sorry. But the thing that amazed me in the course of the story I did about communications was how wide open, how completely useless any security is on these phone systems. Any mobile phone can be hacked. Any mobile phone. Because there is a channel. Because every mobile phone needs to be able to do a handshake. When I fly to America, as I did a few weeks ago, I need to be able to do a handshake in Los Angeles as I get off the plane. And the people in Los Angeles and the telephone company in Los Angeles need to know that I can pay my phone bill when I use my phone in America. And so they have a thing called SS7, which is a back channel message to let the Americans contact Australia to know that I can pay my phone bill. That's pretty much what it's all about. And so a roaming phone like this can basically be intercepted anywhere in the world because the SS7 channel on all mobile phone telephony is essentially a backdoor for any nation that has access to it. And all nation states do, and a lot of telecommunications companies do. And what we did was a demonstration where I was in London and a bunch of German hackers in Berlin hacked my phone as I talked to a member of parliament in Australia. And all I did was give them my phone number. It was breathtaking. And it made me realize as a journalist how irresponsible we are as journalists by relying on mobile phones as a way of protecting sources, because we can't. And we have to be so rigorous now about protecting communications security, which is why I used letters to communicate with people for this UAP investigation.
Interesting. All right, we have 3 minutes before we have to go to break at the top of the hour. I'd like to try and bring in a couple of more questions. Irish Lincoln is asking, do you think the Australians possess any alien bodies or craft?
I have no evidence to suggest that they do, and the people in a position to know, who I do know, in senior positions in defence and intelligence, have cheerfully denied any knowledge to me of any interest at all in UAPs. And when I've pointed out to them that historically the Defence Department in Australia had a very active interest in UAPs and was actively monitoring and recording sightings, they deny that that continues to this day. I'm not sure I believe them, but certainly, as Tim McMillan's pointed out, there is intelligence sharing under the Five Eyes. But as far as I can tell, there are no UAP files being kept inside our government at the moment. It's just not an issue that seems to register with them.
Right.
And sure as hell, I've never heard of any. There are allegations. Actually, my friend Bill Chalker, I know, would think it was remiss of me if I didn't mention that there are allegations of craft that have been recovered, or a craft that was recovered allegedly in the Nullarbor Desert. And I know he's very actively investigating that, and I'd certainly like to hear from anybody who can substantiate it. But I haven't seen any hard evidence myself, no.
2 minutes to go. Curious how you're going to answer this one from Larry. Can you remark on recent abductors saying that hybrids are now living on this planet? Have you heard anything about the hybridization program?
Short answer, no. Don't know anything about it. And again, that's one of those things that's almost impossible to investigate because by its very nature, it's covert and secret. And gosh, I've spoken to people who have claimed to have been abducted. I've interviewed Melinda Leslie, for example, and she's told horror stories about military abductions alleged. And to be honest, I just don't know how to verify those. If there's a way of verifying them, I'd love to know about it. But I don't know anything at all about hybrids or hybridization. I can't rule it out and I can't rule it in.
Wait until you have an alien show up at your window while you're broadcasting. That's why we have Carl, our mascot. Final question before we get to the top of the hour. Apollo 11 is asking, have you heard any interesting Pine Gap-related UFO stories?
I have. In fact, when I was researching Northwest Cape, which is the Harold E. Holt Naval Communications Station based many thousands of kilometres to the west, the northwest of Pine Gap, one of the people that I was talking to said to me, well, why don't you talk about what happened at Pine Gap? And I said, what happened at Pine Gap? And he told me that there have been several incidents where glowing orbs, penetrated the facility and were seen by security guards, filmed on CCTV, apparently tracking the perimeter of the base and taking an interest in it. And it's funny, one of the people I engaged with about this is the wonderful Robert Hastings. And if nobody's bought or read his book, UFOs or Nukes, and nukes they should.
We're going to finish that question and others with our audience here tonight on Spaced Out Radio. Ross Coulthart is our guest. We have until the bottom of the hour when we're going to get to the news wire, the thought of the day. Spaced Out Radio continues right after this. We're clear. We got 6 minutes.
How long am I on for after this, mate?
30. That's it.
30. Oh, good.
Yes, I know you got another interview, so
I've got one at 5, so it gives me half an hour between when you finish and when I start again.
All right, I'm going to just run my dogs outside. I'll be right back, okay?
No problem, mate. Cheers.
Yeah. Excuse me, fellas. All right, my friend. Like this. We'll unmute you there. Matthew
Hello.
Anderson, thank you so much for joining us. Yeah, I could feel you done some cool stories.
I've been very privileged in my career. I could have been a very boring lawyer. I'm glad I became a journalist.
Well, I had no intention of ever getting back into radio until my own experiences started.
Oh, so you've had experiences yourself, have you?
Yeah, I'm a contactee.
Oh, really?
I've been taken.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I've been taken. I've seen, probably, no word of a lie, 140 UFOs.
Good Lord. Do you think the phenomenon follows you once you've engaged with it once?
Yeah. I've seen, I've been wide awake like you and I are right now. I've seen 2 extraterrestrials.
Wow.
Yeah, one was a 10 to 12 foot being in the middle of a forest.
Christ, that must have scared the hell out of you.
That came. I'll introduce you to the best kept secret in ufology. Her name is Samantha Mowat, and she's been on my show a number of times. And I don't care. I've heard government people. I've heard everybody talk about it. Samantha is, in my opinion, put it this way, there's somebody high up that I know who knows about Samantha who said that they don't want to associate with her because she's right and she's too scary.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So when was your most recent interview with her? I'd love to listen.
Lynn did it. I'll tell you the next break. Hold on.
Okay.
Would you like to connect with us? Head to spacedoutradio.com for all your latest show info. Now, back to Dave Scott and SOR.
Here we go with the third and final hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. My name is Dave Scott. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We really do appreciate earning your listening ears wherever you are on this beautiful planet we call Earth. Thank you to everyone tuning us in on our terrestrial affiliates around North America and digitally on KPNL, TalkStream Live, and Revolution Radio. All of our archives are free by going to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Do me the favor, hit that subscribe button. The Desert Clam has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club, Nanocephalus. Nanocephalus is your password. Use it wisely, Space Travelers, as the Clam sets the password each and every night right here on Spaced Out Radio. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including rocking out to Bumblefoot and reading up on Captain Shirk's SOR Newswire. Follow us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and on Instagram, Spaced Out Radio Show. For the final time tonight, we introduce award-winning investigative journalist Ross Coulthart. He is out of Australia and has taken a very deep dive into the UFO world, trying to figure out what all the secrets are that governments around the world are hiding from us. This includes his brand new book, In Plain Sight, an investigation into UFOs and impossible science. Ross, thank you so much for joining us once again.
Pleasure.
Now, as an experiencer, I will say this. I don't care about the technology. The propulsion systems, the G-forces, the 90-degree turns, or anything like that. What I do care about is trying to figure out what is going on from a journalistic level regarding the experiences that people are seeing and people are having, whether it's UFOs in the sky or whether it is extraterrestrial contact or claims to be of extraterrestrial contact. For you, when you look at the giant picture of this story and the magnitude that it holds for the 7.8 billion people on this world, the importance of this story is very large. How do we blend the technology considering we are in a military-industrial complex, to the experiences people were having to get it out to the public?
Do you know, Dave, the more I get into this subject, the more I come back to what the Venerable Jacques Vallée has said about the phenomenon, which is that it's all about consciousness and perception. And one of the other milestones that I came across in the course of my journalistic research into the book was a fantastic slide 9. I don't know if people are aware of this, but it's an excerpt from a PowerPoint or a slide briefing that was done. We know for a fact it was done for the Undersecretary of Defense in the US Defense Department, and it was prepared probably by someone in TTSA, maybe Lou Elizondo, but it was recovered by a person called Jay of the Mind Sublime blog, off the website of Christopher Mellon before Mellon thought to take it down. And I suspect that the way that the videos, the UAP videos from the US Navy and this slide were leaked to the New York Times was that Mellon put them up on his website. And my hunch is that the New York Times knew just to download them. But in the rush to look at the US Navy videos, I don't think enough attention has been paid to the awesome significance of slide 9, because that slide presents what was given in a briefing to the Undersecretary of the Department of Defense. And he, I think it is, was told that the technology exists for the manipulation of human perception and consciousness. And it was suggesting that the phenomenon, whatever it is capable of manipulating human perception and consciousness. And one of the things that I was very privileged to do in my research, another clue that I got along the way, I became privy, and I'm going to slowly release some of this material in the next few months, I became privy to the archives, the as yet unreleased archives of the former astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell. And in his archives, among a lot of papers that I gained access to with the permission of essentially the custodian of that archive, there's a fantastic paper written by Dr. Eric Davis, to which Edgar Mitchell clearly attached a huge amount of significance. And I think the paper is now public, but essentially it's a paper written by Dr. Eric Davis whilst he was at NIDS, the National Institute of Discovery Science, for Robert Bigelow. And it was written by Eric Davis and sent by Hal Puthoff, one of the heads of NIDS, to Edgar Mitchell when he was on the Science Advisory Board for NIDS, the National Institute of Discovery Science. And in that paper, Dr. Eric Davis talks about an incident that you may well know of, the Cash Landrum UFO incident in the United States. And that was where a mother, her sister, and the son, a little boy, Colby, looked up and saw a gigantic object hovering in front of them on a road in the middle of nowhere in the Midwest. And they suffered apparent radiation symptoms as a result of their exposure. But one of the things that was used to ridicule and declaim their sighting was that they claimed that they saw dozens of helicopters in pursuit of this object, in pursuit of this craft that was clearly having some difficulty flying. It was obviously perhaps having some kind of mechanical malfunction. And in his paper, Dr. Eric Davis postulates, or in fact he actually asserts, that the Chinook helicopters, I think there were multiple, 12 Chinook helicopters that they claimed to have seen. And it was used at the time by the Air Force to suggest there was no truth to this sighting claim because there was no way that there were 12 Chinook helicopters in that part of the US at that time. And I just wonder, and this is what Eric Davis was suggesting as well, I wonder whether whatever the phenomenon is, it has the capacity to make human beings see of it what it wants us to see. And I know this sounds slightly off the wall, but I've spoken to people who claim to have seen helicopters where they knew there was no helicopter and where there wasn't a helicopter a few moments later. I've spoken to people who claim to have seen men with Geiger counters or some kind of detected device and black vans in a field where there was no black van, clearly, because the gates were locked and there was never any black van in that field. Something was manipulating their perception. I've spoken to many, many people who've claimed to me that objects that they've seen just don't make sense. That often, have you noticed in how many sightings people often say, I never thought to take a photograph. It never occurred to me to take a photograph. And I wonder sometimes whether whatever this is, it's manipulating our perception and essentially affecting how we see, and what we do in response to it.
Let's go to Excalibur. What's the most troubling information about UFOs that you have heard from your sources to date?
I've done a lot of work on the Brazil Coulthart story. In fact, I've been talking to South American ufology experts about that case, and that's the only case I know of where, apart from the Cash Landrum incident, where people have actually been hurt, damaged as a result, indeed killed as a result of their exposure. And it's quite distressing because I don't doubt for a moment, having heard the evidence from those arrays of military witnesses and the military reports that have been declassified and acknowledged by the Brazilian government, I don't doubt for a moment the veracity of those military witnesses, that people did die, that people did suffer terrible injuries as a result of their exposure to some kind of ionized energy that was deployed against them. And it's just amazing to me that you can have an incident like that happen, albeit during the Cold War, and clearly with American after the fact, ex post facto involvement, where they were taking a strong interest in what had happened. And again, it puzzles me as to why it didn't become a major media event, because it deserved scrutiny, it deserved investigation. So yeah, the Coulthart Brazilian UFOs is one of the most distressing incidents I've heard of.
Gloria is asking, what do you think about the Bob Lazar story then?
Okay, I watched, like everyone, I've sat there late at night and I've watched all the Bob Lazar interviews I can, and I'm a huge admirer of George Knapp. I really admire his resilience and his perspicacity in keeping on with this issue, because I love the cheerful and self-deprecating way that he describes how he came across the Bob Lazar story. And it was essentially because some other reporter wasn't interested, and he just said, I'll look at it. And as a cub reporter myself in my time, I've had that experience, and I've found that sometimes the best stories are the ones that other reporters reject or don't want to go near. So I admire George's courage in telling Bob's story. And I guess I also admire Bob Lazar, because whilst I don't know for sure the veracity of what he says, George and indeed Jeremy Corbell have done some bloody good work to actually make me second guess my assumption that it was all bullshit. I was also really impressed because I briefly spoke with a guy that I suspect was the source that helped corroborate George's claim that Bob Lazar was seen on the Janet Airlines plane going to Area 51. And that was Dave Fruhoff, the former U2 pilot, who also worked, I think, as a manager at Area 51 for some time. I had a very brief conversation with Dave before he got sick, and he kindly confirmed to me some of what he'd also said, I think, to one of the TV shows in America, where he essentially confirmed that he thought that Bob Lazar's case had credibility. I was also really impressed with the work that I think it was Jeremy Corbell, and I apologise to George if I've taken it away from him, but I think it was Jeremy Corbell that tracked down the fellow that did the security assessment of Bob Lazar for his Area 51 S4 briefing. That was hugely significant to me. It was also significant to me that from what George describes when they went to Los Alamos, it does appear that Bob Lazar was telling the truth about his ability to go into Los Alamos and his knowledge of the place there and the people who knew him there. Clearly, the government has lied. I suspect that Bob Lazar lied or in some way has been misleading about his university record, but he wouldn't be the first guy to bodgy up his CV to claim that he had a master's when he didn't. I've got an open mind on the Bob Lazar story. I can't discount it, and I think there are aspects of his story that have real credibility, not least because I have spoken to a source, Nat Kobitz, and other sources, multiple, who've told me that the United States does have retrieved alien craft. I just wish I could prove it.
The reason why I believe the Bob Lazar story is because of George Knapp and KLAS. They have never retracted the story. If there was anything fake or faux about that, I strongly believe they would have retracted, and they never have.
Yeah, I mean, every journalist has a responsibility to correct information if they know it's wrong or misleading. And that's why I apologised earlier for inadvertent comments that I made about abductees. I made an inadvertent comment the other day where I sort of implied unintentionally in a rush in an interview that I was suggesting that all abductions experiences were bullshit artists or crazy people. I wasn't suggesting that. And I think journalists we really should be seen to be correcting ourselves when we make mistakes, because heavens, we're human. We do make mistakes. But you're right. I mean, frankly, if anything, George and Lazar have... There's a weight of evidence to show that there are really serious question marks about what Bob Lazar says. And the reason I'm interested in it is because when George broke those stories, Area 51 became such a well-known area. All the then sightings of black triangles and mysterious objects started where I'm interested, in Northwest Cape in the middle of nowhere in northwestern Australia. And I just wonder if there's a connection. And I was thrilled today because George has invited me on Coast to Coast, and I'm going to ask him about that, because I just wonder whether there's a link, whether there's a nexus between Bob Lazar's exposés in the 80s and what was happening in Australia in the 90s.
That is interesting. I want to ask you, because one of the biggest bones of contention that we see in the UFO world right now is the word sources. Everybody wants to give up, who wants this information is like, tell me who your sources are. Why should I believe you? Tell me who your sources are. Your story is not as worth the bird droppings in a cage if you don't tell me who your sources are. But they don't understand that if you give up those sources, you're literally closing the door on your information pipeline.
Can I tell you, it's funny, I don't think people understand just how much work journalists do behind the scenes to back up a story. Like, I was engaging at one stage with Leslie Keane and the New York Times last year when they were working on their follow-up story, which ended up with them running the quite extraordinary allegation in one of the world's most reputable newspapers that allegations being made by people of some reputation, like Eric Davis, that the United States has recovered exotic technologies, or that indeed that Congress has been briefed about off-world vehicles. I mean, those are amazing claims to be made in a newspaper. And the reason I respected them so much is because I've done stories with the New York Times in the past. I've collaborated with them on investigations. And seriously, they are so annoying. They make you pull your hair out, because for every on-the-record source, you have to have dozens, multiple backup corroborative sources to back what you say. And this happens all the time in journalism. And I get a lot of people, I've had people abusing me on Twitter in the last few weeks, basically saying, they want to know who my sources are, who are supportive of Nat Kobitz's claims that the program exists, that there is some kind of back engineering program. And indeed, I suspect that there is, because not only Nat told me this, but multiple other sources. And some people have actually been quite abusive. They've been attacking and basically saying, how dare you run this claim? It's bullshit. It's, how dare you, you're being irresponsible. That's how 99% of journalism works. Wake up to yourself. The reality is that I often wonder if I was in possession of an incredible secret. Let's just say I knew and I had the information to show that there's a re-engineered spacecraft sitting on blocks somewhere in a cave in Area 51. Would I reveal it? Do you know, I've got a beautiful wife and two beautiful daughters, and I would probably be really concerned about protecting them, because the vengeance of the state when a secret is exposed is merciless. And, I would guard a secret like this viciously. If necessary, I can understand a state possibly even killing to protect it. This is the biggest secret ever. If the United States genuinely does have recovered extraterrestrial technology, if it does, it's the biggest secret ever. It's huge. And you'd protect it. By God, you'd protect it, because you'd want to give yourself a strategic advantage. And that's why I kind of have a begrudging respect for the gatekeepers, if they are there, who are holding this secret, which I suspect they are. Because I know from sources certain things that I haven't yet alleged publicly. Shocking things. But I can't corroborate that to my satisfaction yet, because I haven't been able to multiply corroborate it with other sources. But it's why I feel a degree of confidence, and you may notice I have an optimism and a positivity about this subject matter, a degree of certainty that you might be surprised by. I know a lot of my colleagues are. And the reason I feel that is because of those sources. And in my book, you might notice that my acknowledgements in my book are to those brave, brave whistleblowers, the people who had the courage to talk to me even on background, because they weren't just risking their jobs. I reckon they were risking their lives.
How important is it for you as a journalist to keep those sources and their names out of a UFO story?
I've actually been cross-examined in a court where I've been told that if I don't reveal the name of a source, I will go to jail. And I was terrified. I was a very young journalist, and we were fighting a defamation case. And the judge very kindly gave me a recess to go away and think about it, because I was crying in the box. I was really upset because I was feeling the pressure, knowing that I was going to be sent to jail for contempt if I didn't reveal my source. And it was the silliest thing, because in America it's legal to do this, but there was a cop, a policeman friend, had helped me investigate somebody by running a license plate, and he'd given me the name and address of the person who owned the vehicle. And the irony was, at that time in Queensland, where he'd done it, it was legal. And I didn't realise that it was, that I could actually write to the blooming registrar of motor vehicles and ask for this information. But I sure as hell wasn't going to blow my source, a friendly cop who'd done it for me, without his permission. And I rang him in the recess, and he says, "Oh, mate, piss them off. Don't worry about that." He says, "Bugger them. I don't mind being named." And thank God for the courage of somebody like that, because I went back into the court and I said, "Your Honour, I am now able to answer the question. I have permission from my source, and I want it recorded in the court with transcript that my source has given me express permission to name him." And I did so, and that moment passed. But by golly, I would have gone to jail to protect that source if he'd asked me to, because the one thing you have as a journalist is your integrity. You have to protect your sources. It is the most important thing, because people tell me things all the time as a journalist, and I'm sure people like Tim McMillan, George Knapp, Brian Bender, Leslie Kane, Ralph Blumenthal, they've had the same experience. People have all told us stuff in the black, off the record, on background, that we can't reveal without compromising those sources. And by golly, we'll protect them as long as we can.
Ross, we got about 1 minute to go with you before we have to say goodnight, and I really appreciate you taking the time to spend some time with us here on Spaced Out Radio. I would love to do this again very, very soon. Do me a favor, please, and tell our audience where they can find your brand new book.
Funnily enough, I've just, while I was talking to you this afternoon, I just got notification. It's available. You can find it in Australia at booktopia.com.au, which is a very famous bookstore here in Australia. All major bookshops have now got it on the shelves in Australia. It's been released yesterday. It's being released in the UK and Europe on the 15th of August. And it's being released, God bless America, they're a little slow, in apparently early October in America. But you can pre-order at Barnes & Noble and Amazon.com. and they're very happy to take your pre-orders, and I'm very happy to see those pre-orders being placed. And believe me,
I know in our chat room there's already been 3 pre-orders placed.
That's fantastic. Well, look, I really am so grateful for engaging with your listeners and your viewers, because I love it. I really enjoy the feedback. So if there are people that want to contact me, they can get hold of me at rosscoulthart.com. And if you go to my Twitter handle, you'll see there's an email there where you can communicate with me on an encrypted email system. And I would love to hear from anyone who's kicked the tires of the ARV in Area 51.
Ross Coulthart, everybody. He is a legend, and we're glad to have him here. We'll have to bring him back soon. Coming up next, we have the SOR Newswire and the Thought of the Day. Spaced Out Radio continues right after this. Great show.
Thank you very much, Dave. I'm very grateful to you for giving me the coverage. It's been a privilege to talk to you. I'm so excited to meet somebody I've listened to for so long.
Well, oh gosh, you were listening to me. That now I feel embarrassed. You don't want any part of this, you know. But Samantha Mowat, there is somebody you need to talk to.
Is it M-O-W or M-O-U?
M-O-W-A-T.
I will look it up. Is she Canadian?
Yeah, throw a .ca on the end, and you have her website, and she will blow your mind. 25 minutes after meeting her back in 2014, this is 5 days after I had a UFO landing site, like 150 yards in front of me. I meet Samantha, and and it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I've known this pixie little redhead for about 25 minutes, and she drags me off into a forest behind the property where this landing had taken place. And we walk about 100 yards into the forest, and she stops me, and she goes, "Dave, I don't want you to be afraid. I want you to look that way," pointing north. And she goes, "I want you to tell me what you see." And I turn and look, and I said, "Samantha, what the fuck is that?" What the fuck is that? Because literally there was 200 feet in front of us, there was a 10 to 12 foot extraterrestrial standing there.
And she'd known it was going to be there?
Yeah.
Wow. I've met people like that. There's a lovely man, Damien Knott, here in Australia, who has the similar ability.
Yeah.
Quite mystical.
Yeah. And there were 2 beings there. I didn't see the second one. I couldn't take my eyes off this big bastard. And they invited us over.
Oh, really?
And there was only Samantha and I in the forest. The being telepathically told, the second one told Samantha, "You're more than welcome to come over and say hello. We're not here to harm you. We're not here to take you. However, we are very concerned about the man's health."
Oh, wow. And were you ill?
No, I was scared shitless.
So you started working out.
And I'm going to say this. I wasn't scared of the being. I was scared that everything I knew in my first 40 years on this planet was now relatively useless.
And that's what I think lies at the bottom of all this, Dave.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't like having their worldview challenged.
Yeah. I agree with you. I'm just typing in her website here. And her YouTube channel is just Samantha Mowat as well. So I'll put it up for you if you want to.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. Wonderful. I'll definitely get in touch with her.
Yeah.
By the way, have you done any work on the Penturk, the Welsh UFO sighting, which sounds like a really interesting military sighting?
No.
I'm just about to do some digging into it because it fascinates me. It's a very good friend of mine, John, in the United Kingdom, has put me onto it, and it does sound like there's been some kind of retrieval operation in the UK in very recent years.
Interesting. Wow. I'd love to hear
Anyway,
about
my
that.
friend, I better get ready for my next interview.
I got to get ready for the news. You guys take care, okay? We'll talk soon.
All the best, mate. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Ross Coulthart, everybody. How awesome was that? How awesome was that? That was fantastic. I'm happy about that one. Thank you to Excalibur Aussie Ange, Aussie Steve, Kevin, Hector, ×2, Science Bob, Beverly, Guillermo, Jazz, Apollo, Mike, Gabe, Mennonite Abe, Sally, Walker, Gary, and Space Cow for the amazing super chats tonight. You guys are amazing. Love you guys. And thank you for your love and support of this show. God, that was a fun interview. Kids Future, how you doing? Welcome to the show. That was a very, very fun interview, and we're going to continue that. You know, I was blown away. I'll be honest with you. I had no idea Ross listened to our show. No idea. That is fantastic. I got a little sheepish there for a second. I really did. Quickly here. All right. If you're looking for some nice beard oil, go to MightyMooseBeard.com. Gary the Dutchman has you all set up. It's all in Canadian funds. I don't have time to put any on right now because we're on in 20 seconds. But go to Mighty Moose Beard. Tell Gary the Dutchman that you're using promo code SOR2019, and he's going to give you a deal. Much to the chagrin of Dutch people everywhere, he's going to give you a deal. MightyMooseBeard.com. Here we go. We've rounded third. We're heading for home tonight on Spaced Out Radio. My name is Dave Scott. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We really do appreciate earning your listening ears wherever you are on this beautiful planet we call Earth. And we also want to say and remind everybody that our archives are free by going to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Do me the favor, hit that subscribe button. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including rocking out to Bumblefoot and reading up on Captain Shirk's SOR Newswire. Follow us on Twitter @SpacedOutRadio and on Instagram, Spaced Out Radio Show. Speaking of the news, the news is always changing, which is why we bring you the SOR Newswire at the back end of every show, where we get to the weird, the strange, the wacky, and sometimes the time traveling. The man known only as Edward told Apex TV that he was a part of a top-secret time-traveling experiment in 2004 and was sent 3,000 years into the future. Yes, this man, who claims to be a time traveler from the year 5000, says entire cities will be underwater because of climate change, and he's brought back photographic evidence. To his surprise, the man claims that when he arrived in the future, he was presented with the sight of Los Angeles, submerged by a great body of water. Edward says that he had been working in LA in a laboratory when he said he was given an assignment to go into the future and take photographs. In the video, the man's face is blurred, of course, and his voice distorted, of course, as he tells his story, supposedly to protect his identity. Now, he said, "I will tell you a story which will amaze you, and you will be astonished. I appeared to place. It was unbelievable. I was standing on a huge wooden platform, not only me, houses, buildings, and of course all made from wood. And after I realized it was the same city, Los Angeles, but underwater." Edward also claimed that he had spoken with people who lived there who told him the flood had happened due to global warming. Last week, a time traveler claiming to be from the year 2491 said giant aliens with distorted appearance will arrive on Earth in 2022. That may be possible. The adventurer, who goes by the name Future Time Traveler on TikTok, revealed some of the details of his extraterrestrial species and bizarrely claimed that they will spark war with humans. Well, doesn't that play into Dr. Stephen Greer? Another recently made bonkers claim that there would be pyramids in the sky and warned viewers to not look up at them when or if his outrageous prediction occurs. And TikTok account Time Voyager, who also claims to have arrived at real-time Earth in December 2020, posted on social media that there would be a great wave hitting in the summer of 2021. According to NASA, although humans can't stop or hop into a time-traveling machine and go back in time, we do know that clocks on airplanes and satellites travel at a different speed than those on Earth. We could use a time machine to travel hundreds of years into the past. That kind of time travel only happens in books and movies. But the math of time travel does affect the things we use every day. For example, GPS satellites. All right, you buying that one or not? I'm not buying it. Not buying it at all. I love a good woo. Trust me, I love it, but I'm not buying that one. Make way, SETI. There's a new game in town called the Galileo Project. If you haven't heard by now, SETI began in 1960 and has, in the intervening 6 decades, been almost exclusively limited to the search for radio and laser signals from potential alien civilizations. But the Galileo Project, which has just launched, will instead embark on a systematic search of the skies above Earth and our outer space for artificial objects of extraterrestrial origin, possible space probes like Oumuamua, active sensors, or long-defunct astroarchaeological artifacts. Serendipity played a role in the start of that venture, according to Harvard astronomer Avi Loeb, who heads the project. Yeah, Loeb has said that as an administrator in Harvard's astronomy department, that they just received $200,000 for the research fund, which someone had donated without even telling him. A day or so later, Loeb was able to contact the generous individual, whom he didn't know beforehand, and after their conversation, he was even given more money. Since then, other individuals have sent money to support the research effort of Galileo. No strings attached. In a couple of weeks, Loeb has accumulated $1.75 million. They basically told me, here is the money. Do whatever you think is right, he said. In all of my decades in academia, that kind of thing never happens. And of course, if you want to hear the replay of Avi Loeb with his interview with Lynn Wallington from last week, all you have to do is go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/spacedoutradio, and check out the free archive right there for you, where he talks about Galileo. Now, Loeb has gained notoriety because he has argued that Oumuamua, the first known object passing by Earth to come from outside our solar system, had particular features unlike those of any asteroid or comet seen before. Oumuamua is now headed towards Neptune on its way out of the solar system, and we'll never know exactly where it came from or what it's made of. Loeb issued a controversial suggestion in his book in a 2018 Astrophysical Journal Letters paper that Oumuamua could have been the product of an alien civilization, a possibility, he stressed, that should not be dismissed out of hand. I love this Avi Loeb. I think he is truly the future of what ufology needs. And this Galileo project, I hope it sticks through. Because if he's going to get the funding, this could be a lot of fun, people. A lot of fun. All right, moving on to a stinky situation. Police have caught an Indianapolis area person known by people across proportional area premises as the Pooper. The abruptly and aptly named dubbed defecator has been dropping feces in Fishers, Indiana, and the person fingered was ferreted out by police, discovering droppings on their lawns every few days. Tiny piles of toilet paper and unpleasant pallets of petulant poo had been scattered across 3 or 4 plots and parcels each week this summer, the denizens say. The problem of an unknown, unnamed person plopping on the neighbors' properties was also persistently present last summer. The alleged miscreant excrement has forced citizens to claim the cleanup chores to capture and cast away the bowel movement messes they believe to be jogger jettisoned for someone else to muck up. A plethora of placards demarking the scenes of those dastardly deeds failed to dissuade the defecation for days on end, and they were even featured in local television stories dedicated to disseminating the details of the hostile dumps. Local constables said they've now captured the unnamed craven culprit, apparently caught on doorbell camera taking a poo on someone's yard. Yes, the offense and odious odor will not reportedly result in any criminal ramifications for now, the Fishers Police Department said on Facebook. Both neighbors and the police identified the culprit as a female, but the authorities said at least one person has been falsely accused of being the pooper, in this case suggesting that they want to smooth it out and make sure that they got the right DNA for the capture. Yeah, I went there. I don't care what you think. That story's awesome. The rocket billionaire discourse, heady as it is, can distract from the facts. Here's one. NASA saved at least $548 million and perhaps more thanks to just one contract with Elon Musk's SpaceX. Last week, the U.S. Space Agency tapped the company's Falcon Heavy rocket to launch a space probe to one of Jupiter's moons, Europa, in 2024. The much-awaited Europa Clipper mission will fly by and assess the evidence of water, ET life, on the astronomical body. Their mission was driven... Oh, Captain Shirk is messaging me during the news. I got to figure out what it is. She goes, I told you that poopy story was a no-go. It made me sick. Sorry, Captain Shirk. Had to do it. I'll get back to the news now, if you don't mind. See, when my news reporter jumps on in, I got to answer it right there. I have to. Anyways, let's go back to it. The mission was driven through Congress thanks in large part to the support of one former representative, John Culberson, a Texas Republican, who navigated it through the sea of veto points and competing priorities that often stands between scientific hopes and their realization. The good news is NASA is saving a ton of dough, and that's a good thing. No word if they are using Geico for insurance. I don't know if I like this or not. I really don't. But old Davey has had knee surgery before. All right, and now a California robotics company is about to bring a high-tech knee brace to the market that could relieve the suffering of millions of Americans grappling with osteoarthritis of the knee. That is true. That might work then. All right, it may especially appeal to patients who want to avoid knee replacement surgery. Oh, this is getting better. San Francisco-based Rome Robotics said its $7,000 Ascend orthosis should start shipping this winter. Certified by the FDA as a Class 1 medical service, Rome anticipates reimbursement from both Medicare and private insurance. Medicare could cover 50% or higher, and with private insurance, the entire cost could be covered in some cases. Rome is located in San Fran, across the street from Other Lab, an engineering firm awarded tens of millions of dollars in government research contracts, mostly for robotics and energy products. Rome is one of the several startups to emerge from Other Lab. Its founder and CEO, Tim Swift, is a veteran of Exco Bionics and is looking into this. You know what? I got to say this. If they can figure out a way to keep the knee cool, so for instance, that you can wear it on a hot summer day, that would be really cool. Really, really cool. Because I know I'm definitely going to be up for one when it comes to knee replacement. So that has the potential to be really awesome. I just hope they go through with it because it'll be fantastic. I'm very curious to see how good this gets. I really am. I want to see that. Oh, my knees are just aching for that right now. I thought I was going to be scared of that story. I really did. Apparently I'm not. Now I want that. All right, moving on. An Illinois woman faces criminal charges. Why? After she captured a video being bluff charged by a grizzly bear while she was taking photos in Yellowstone National Park. The woman was among a small group of tourists who spotted the female grizzly and her two cubs. Oh, this gets better. On May 15th in the Roaring Mountain area of the park. Witnesses told investigators that they saw the bears coming closer. They returned to their vehicles and warned the woman to get back, but of course, she knows better, and she obviously almost got herself killed, but thankfully the sow grizzly, who was protecting her cubs, did a bluff charge. Park regulations require visitors to stay at least 300 feet away from bears and wolves. Video of the encounter was widely shared on social media. On May 25th, the park posted a photo of the woman along with a plea for tips that could help identify her. Yeah, bad, lady, bad. Investigators got a warrant to search the suspect's social media post after receiving a tip from someone who had seen a posting of the video with the suspect's name tag. The Carroll Stream, Illinois woman faces charges of feeding, touching, teasing, frightening, or intentionally disturbing wildlife and violating closures and use limits. An initial court appearance has been set for August 26th. The woman has not yet entered a plea. About 2 weeks after the incident, a 39-year-old hiker was injured by a grizzly bear. The man suffered significant injuries to his lower extremities. In other words, he had his ass chewed off, but was able to hike out on his own. In July of this year, a woman camping in Montana was pulled from her tent and killed by a grizzly bear. Wildlife officials later shot and killed the animal. Montana's grizzly and human populations have both risen substantially since 1975, when the bears were protected under the Endangered Species Act. Look, it's real simple. You see a grizzly bear, you go the other way. Take your photo from the vehicle, okay, because they're brutally fast, especially with the cubs around. I mean, at some point you have to use that noodle in your head that says approaching a mama grizzly bear is never a good idea. Pilots flying in and out of LA International Airport were given a warning after another possible sighting of a man flying a jetpack in the area. The FAA confirmed a pilot contacted air traffic control Wednesday evening to report a possible sighting of the jetpack man again. A Boeing 70, come on, read this. You've said it before. A Boeing 747 pilot reported seeing an object that might have resembled a jetpack 15 miles east of LAX at an altitude of 5,000 feet. Out of an abundance of caution, air traffic controllers alerted other pilots in the vicinity. The FAA said there were no unusual objects spotted on radar in the area. The possible sighting comes after a number of similar sightings in late 2020. A video captured in December shows something resembling a man wearing a jetpack in the sky over LA. Investigators have suggested the object in the video could be a drone made to look like a man. And finally tonight, we have found our listener Faps match. A Connecticut-based TikTok star with an unusually large mouth was given by Guinness Book of World Records as having the world's largest mouth gape. 31-year-old Samantha Ramsdell went viral multiple times on TikTok when she showed off the size of her mouth, leading her to seek the Guinness World Record for the world's largest mouth gape. Now, a Guinness adjudicator accompanied Ramsdell to her local dental office in South Norwalk, Connecticut, where her gape was measured at 2.56 inches. Being 31 and being able to get a record for something that I really was so insecure about, something that I really wanted to keep so small, it's great because now it's like one of the biggest, best things about me. Ramsdell has 1.7 million followers and has even done duet videos with Isaac Johnson, whose 4-inch gape earned him the male version of the record. Now, why do we bring up Fap in our chat room? He has a really large head. A really large head. And I think we finally found him something that will fit on top so he can finally wear a ball cap. It's just that simple. It's just that simple. We found it, Fapster. We found it. Thought of the Knave happens every night at this time, where we ask a question on our Facebook and Twitter pages, then read your responses on the air because we love the audience participation around here. Today's Thought of the Knave is as follows. What's the biggest UFO secret the U.S. government is hiding? Meaty Toes says abduction. No way they are even admitting to that. Powerless to stop it from happening. Mark, that they have met the pilots. Skywatch, the Roswell incident in 47. Nick, that we have visitors from another world here and that they have been here for a very long time. Period. The Lazarus Project. Probably that they were here before us and they'll be here well after us. And let's go to Dan. Technology, reverse engineered or given to us, health cures, etc. Brain on waves, our UFO demise, our demise. James, unless Colonel Corso and many other ex-military authors were lying, there is some kind of arrangement, agreement with the others. Flash forward, definitely the advanced propulsion technology, the surreal seal. What are they doing now? Ted, I don't know. It's just a secret. Eric, the citizens are dealing with this issue. Kimberly, we want bodies, man. We want bodies. Alex Mistretta, who only answers with a shirt off, says that the Greys love breakfast for dinner, especially chicken with gravy and waffles. John, that they've known from early on exactly who and what they are and their intentions. Kevin, that most UFOs are government-owned. Brucey Bruce agrees that all UFOs must be government-owned. Oh, I highly doubt that, Brucey Bruce. I highly doubt that. Let's get to Bobby. Non-terrestrial officers in the armed forces, and Melinda Leslie seems to concur with that. Melinda's a frequent guest on this show. Catherine, the biggest secret? E.T., the movie, was actually a documentary. Now there's some food for thought right there, don't you think? Penman, I'd say their biggest secret is that they have captured E.T. spacecraft in their possession, and of course, aliens both dead and alive. Could you imagine if that was true? I want that to be true. I honestly believe that it is true. But could you imagine being some rookie who gets hired by, let's see here, whoever runs Area 51, and the next thing you know, they put you in this area and they say, "Oh, what do you know about aliens?" You're like, maybe I watched a few videos and keeping up with UFO Twitter. And then all of a sudden, Ock the Gray comes walking in to grab a coffee from the lunchroom. "Morning, fellas." How'd you react to that? I don't know how I would. I'm not going to lie. That might scare me a little bit. Jim, the governments are the aliens. Well, that's a whole different ballgame there that might have some truth to it. Aren't they supposed to all be reptilians? That you have to have reptilian blood in order to run for political office? Jim may be onto something there. Tyler, we'll never know. Dave, we'll never know. I don't know. We just may know one day. The final word tonight goes to Dave, not me, the other Dave. There is no Chipotle in space. That's not nice. That's not a nice thing to think about. Thank you to everybody participating in the Thought of the Dave on Facebook and Twitter. We'll do it all again next time. Thank you to Captain Shirk for the news, and especially putting in that poopy story in there. And thank you so much to Ross Coulthart, award-winning journalist, talking UFOs with us all night long. We got Mr. Ron Bumblefoot Thal rocking in the background with Little Brother is Watching. Bumblefoot is the official music of Spaced Out Radio, rocking us in and out of every single show. Get your horns up for the guitar god himself. Special thanks to everybody listening in at home, at work, in your cars, wherever you may be. Thank you to everyone in our chat rooms tonight on YouTube, LGAP, Spreaker, Twitch, Facebook, Revolution Radio, and on Twitter at hashtag Spaced Out Radio.
I know you're out there somewhere.
Remember, this show is copyright by Spaced Out Radio and SOR Media Ventures Limited. Thank you so much for choosing to share your evening with us, because together, my friends, say it with me, we own the night. Mr. Bumblefoot, we need a favor. We need you to take us home. Yes, the Woo train has docked for the night, but soon, my friends, we shall ride again. Your seats are always available. Your tickets never expire. And if you want to bring a friend, we've got room for them too. Good night.